good morning. I'm Diana McCabe. I'm the business editor at the San Diego Union Tribune, and I want to welcome everyone today to the Economic Roundtable here at USD and sponsored with the county. With me today is my colleague Roger Scholey. He's a longtime growth and development writer at the paper, and he and I have moderated this panel now several times, and we enjoy it quite a bit. So we're looking forward to the discussion today. Just a few housekeeping things. First, there are still some seats down here. Come on down. You can hear and see better. You can make eye contact with us. The other thing is, I'm going to have one of these up here, but it's on mute. And hopefully yours will be on mute as well. We do want you, though, to feel free to tweet and put us on Instagram, Facebook, wherever. There's a hashtag here, SD Econ Round. So if you see me doing that, I'm not ignoring anybody. I'm just either trying to look up a tough question for these guys, or I'm going to be getting ready to tweet. The other thing to know is if you want to go back and replay this fabulous presentation, or you want to go back and find out what somebody said, these presentations will be available on the website. I think all the information is up here. You should have also gotten a packet of information that has the agenda, and most importantly, pieces of paper that you can write down questions, and those will be sent back up here and magically come over here for questions for these guys. So there are evaluation forms and that type of thing too. And last but not least, the bathrooms. Should you need to get up and go, they're to the right of the auditorium. So we'll get going. I have a couple of speakers to announce before we get going with the panel. And I'm really interested in this first speaker because I think he was pretty busy on Twitter last night. And I'm only going to say one word: Chargers. So I don't want to. Maybe he'll grace us with a few words about the Chargers, but. Supervisor Ron Roberts, he's been on the County Board of Supervisors since 1994, and he's been on many, many boards and committees. He's chairman this year, but he's also served on the Workforce Partnership Group, the Metropolitan Transit System, and the City-County Reinvestment Task Force. I personally know that he is a big proponent of clean air, clean energy, and not just for consumers, but also how to incorporate that into the business community. So maybe he'll talk about the Chargers a little bit up here, give you that opportunity, but please give me a warm round of applause for Ron Roberts.
Well, thank you and good morning. Welcome to this, our 32nd annual San Diego Economic Roundtable. And I see Marnie Cox sitting here. You didn't mention Sandag, which that takes the most of my time. And I'm serving currently as chair of that, and Marnie does a lot of our forecasting, and I've been listening to Marnie for years, and I don't say that in a critical way, in a very positive way. I mean, he has nailed an awful lot of very accurate forecasts on the growth of the regions. You're fortunate to have him and all of these people here this morning. Now, for those of you who are here to get some information on how to do better on fantasy football, this is not the place, okay? If you did win the lottery tonight, you might want to listen, last night, you might want to listen to them. And I suspect none of you did. We didn't either, or I wouldn't be here. So in spite of that, I want to thank you for attending. This is our region's longest running free economic forecasting event. I know I've been here a number of times, and I know of all the things that have been going on here, and it is a wonderful program with a solid tradition to providing insight and analysis about things that are going on in our region. And this year is not going to be any different than it's been in the past. For almost 3 decades, the county and its partners, and I'd like to single those out, the Workforce Partnership is one, the USD School of Business is another, the San Diego Union Tribune as you've heard, is another, and all of these are advertised up here. And all of them have worked to bring together economists, industry experts, and business leaders, really to inform us and to give us an idea of some of the things that are going on in San Diego. As we search for opportunities, we look forward to hearing what our panelists will say 2016 holds for us. There's a lot of questions I think we have. You know, what does a $30 barrel of oil mean? In California, it doesn't seem to mean much, but in the rest of the world, it has a lot of impact. It's certainly, you haven't seen it at our gas pumps, and there's reasons for that. I won't mention that I serve on the State Air Resources Board, which is partially responsible for that because we do have a different kind of gasoline here. But questions about housing. Will the housing be a boom again? Will single-digit returns be the norm for Wall Street? I know as we manage the county's pension funds and other things, that's really a major issue for us. What kinds of jobs should our children and our grandchildren, for me at least, what should they be thinking about? What should they be training for? What is the environment going to be? I've heard predictions in the past here that multiple jobs is what you should be preparing for, and a flexibility. So we'll be interested in. And what about the Chargers? I will comment, but I don't want to profess to be an expert, but I will tell you, it's all about the money. It's about like everything else you're going to be discussing here. Very, very simple. We have an owner who's looking ahead, thinking, you know, once in LA, we saw that a former San Diego team that some of you are aware of, the Clippers, were sold for $2 billion. You know, this little basketball team with these guys running around with their little shorts, sold for $2 billion. So our local football owner is thinking ahead, you know, I'm going to probably have to sell this someday, maybe next week. Maybe I should think of moving to LA and do what the Clippers did, you know, and enjoy an appreciated value in my franchise. This isn't, you know, I don't want to belittle any of the fans, but it's not about the fans, it's all about the money. So we have been working diligently to try to create an opportunity, knowing that LA has a lot of inherent advantages, some disadvantages that aren't reflected on, like the fact that they have, you know, well, they don't have an NFL, well, they have an NFL team now, the Rams, but they don't have, you know, they haven't had football there. They haven't had NFL football. They've actually had better teams than most of the NFL teams in both USC and UCLA. So they've had football, and they have a plethora of other professional sports teams that compete for those entertainment dollars. It isn't an unlimited supply. So the market there is distinctly different. Yes, there's a lot of maybe owners of things like Walt Disney who are interested maybe in someday owning a franchise, and so maybe you could sell a franchise there for a great deal more because of the sort of the nature of the marketplace than you could in San Diego. I will tell you, your mayor has worked incredibly hard to see if we could put together some type of an arrangement that doesn't cripple us here, but that provides a new stadium. And I've joined him in those efforts. The county and the city have become partners, as we were when we built the original stadium in San Diego, and I remember that distinctly. It cost all of $27 million. I was a student in architecture at Berkeley, and every time I came home, I wanted to go see how the construction was going. And, you know, just like the 27 million, that's a long time ago. In any event, I wouldn't make any predictions yet. They're going to sit down with Mr. Kroc, see what kind of a deal they can get. Hopefully they will sit down with us to understand fully what it is, what we're giving them. And the fact that here they might be able to control their own destiny rather than being a tenant in somebody else's stadium might have some advantages, even in appreciation of a franchise. I'd rather live here, I can tell you that. So we'd like to see him stay, but enough about that. You're going to have important stuff, okay? And that's kind of the fun stuff, and it is in the category, the fantasy football and all that stuff. We do it, and we play the lottery maybe when it gets up to about $1 billion because it's fun, not terribly important, okay? This is the important stuff here. So, at the county, we are interested on some of the things you're going to hear about. Our fiscal stability is extremely important to us. We've maintained a AAA credit rating for over a decade now, and there haven't been many local governments that have been able to do that. In fact, it's very rare in a large local government, and we are a large local government with over a $5 billion budget annually now. It's a very big business, but that fiscal stability is extremely important to us, and we've tried to take a very disciplined approach to the way we spend money. If we're going to spend money on a stadium, it's because we know we have that money. We're going to have to make some changes, but we have money set for capital improvements that we could use for something like that. You're going to hear, and you're going to understand better, I think, that we have to realize that, the economy runs in cycles. Right now, everybody, at the federal and the state level, they can't wait to get their hands on all this money that's pouring in. Tomorrow, the spigot will be shut off, and they won't know what they're doing because they will start all these new programs. At the county, we say one-time money for one-time expenses. If we have an ongoing source of money that we can really count on, then we can talk about programmatic things that are going to be ongoing, and I think it makes a lot of sense. Well, you're going to have a great day here today, and I want to thank you for coming and participating. I mean, more people need to be informed of what's going on locally, and especially in our economy here. I get a lot of advice from people who I wish I could send to this, and have them sit here and absorb some of these things. But I'm glad that you're here, and I hope that you enjoy this 32nd annual San Diego Economic Roundtable. I'd like to introduce Christina DeVaca, who's the Director of Recruiting and Admissions for USD's School of Business and Graduate Programs. She's going to have a few words of welcome for you also. Thank you.
So good morning and welcome to all of you on behalf of the University of San Diego and the School of Business. We are really looking forward to a valuable and very useful discussion this morning. And as the Director of Recruitment and Admissions, I have some insight into things that go on in the world of potential candidates and people who are looking for education and looking for more knowledge. And yesterday I had a really unique experience. I was interviewing a young woman who has lived around the world and has worked around the world and has applied to the University of San Diego's MBA program in the School of Business. And so after our conversation, which was really interesting based on what she has done in the world, she came back with a question that really made me think about what I am doing and how that impacts others. And what she asked is, what drew you to the University of San Diego? Well, questions like that really make one reflect. And we have to think a little bit, just a little deeper perhaps sometimes than we're normally thinking. And I know that what brought me here was one thing, but what keeps me enthusiastic, what keeps me happy to be here every day is the fact that we have an opportunity here to connect people with their opportunities for professional growth, for development, for career advancement. And I think that one of the things that we all have in common is that we really have an interest in making an impact on our world, those around us, our environment. And it is because of that that I love being here and being able to connect those dots on many occasions for people. So as they go forth and build their skills and their knowledge base, we here today really are interested in learning a little bit about our economic environment and having a better understanding of what opportunities are available to all of us. I look forward to the comments regarding the workforce, the real estate market, innovation, and of course, one of those industries that has been growing here in San Diego pretty phenomenally, the beer brewing industry. So I'm looking forward to those comments. I want to say that it's especially rewarding to be a part of the School of Business at USD because it's a place that takes us in new directions and inspires us and helps us inspire those around us. So not only have we been recognized for what we do here, we've been highly ranked in a variety of different ways. Our teachers have won accolades. Our faculty is distinguished, has won many accolades, many awards, not just for research, but also for teaching. And the school itself is consistently ranked. So just as a point of interest here, the Financial Times has ranked the University of San Diego School of Business as #3 in entrepreneurship, not in the nation, in the world. We have a whole series that goes on, and I'll just read a couple of them for you. Bloomberg Business Week ranks us #3 in the state of California and 13 in the United States for part-time MBAs. We have a Forbes ranking as one of America's most entrepreneurial research universities. We have a US ranking for #7 for best online graduate business programs. And a Business Insider recently ranked the School of Business #12 for network and quality. So the list goes on and on. But we are here because we want to learn about what's in store for us regarding San Diego's economy. And to take us there, we have a group of very distinguished panelists, which you will all be introduced to in a moment. But to begin this process, I want to introduce Jeff Light, editor of the San Diego Union Tribune.
Morning, everybody. It's a great privilege and honor for the Union Tribune to be a sponsor of this panel. I'm looking forward to what we hear today, so I'll be pretty brief. I guess I'm also proud that our paper is distinguished by being probably among its peer group the one that's most engaged with local economists, because I think this conversation is really important, and I agree with what Ron Roberts said, that the literacy in these areas of the economy is really important for all of us. Now, typically I would go back and look at what these guys had to say last year, but I guess that's become a little irritating. So I did go back and look at the coverage, and surprisingly, last year's news story about this panel was all about the economic merits of public investment in stadiums. And the conversation was pretty interesting, but along with it, there was a little internet poll, and it asked, is public investment in a stadium a good idea? And the votes were, strangely, and this is what you'll find on internet polls, 59% of people on this said that a stadium was a good idea for the use of public funds. A convention center got only 14%, and public education got 27%. So that will tell you a little bit about the wisdom of the crowd and also the wisdom of the internet. I think the opinions here would be a little bit different. Now, we have done polling on how people feel about public money in this kind of infrastructure, and pretty consistently between 63 and 65% of people in San Diego oppose the use of public money in a football stadium. Although when you ask more specifically, like the Mission Valley project that was proposed by the city and the county, the opposition, although there's significant public money there, really dropped. So I think the number was about 39% opposed when we polled there. So how people think about the value of that money is going to be pretty interesting, and it's unclear whether we'll have an opportunity to weigh in on that, depending on what happens in the coming weeks. Now, one other point on this, we also looked in the last year at what happens to cities, what happens in cities where teams depart. And with the exception of Los Angeles until this week, invariably the cities go out and recruit a new team at significantly higher cost than it would have taken to keep their old team. And there's an economic principle at work there. And the numbers in Houston, St. Louis, Cleveland, Baltimore, and Oakland were 141% premium. In other words, 2.5 times the cost that it would have taken to preserve the team was spent to recruit a new team. So right now in San Diego, the proposal is for $350 million in public money. It'd be interesting to see what happens, and I'll wonder if we'll be here in 5 years looking at $843 million that we spent to build a new stadium. But we shall see. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say today. It is a very interesting economic year for reasons that go well beyond a stadium. And with that, I will turn the podium over to Peter Kallstrom, CEO of the Workforce Partnership, and we can get headed toward some real information here. Peter?
Thanks, Jeff. Good morning, everybody. We just have a few slides. This will take about 40 minutes, so settle in. No, here we go. I won't read the slides for you. I know you're all very well educated, but this gives you a snapshot of what the Workforce Partnership, what we are, what we do, our reach in the community, serving a lot of people, making a lot of progress. This infographic was put together by Wilda on our team. Is Wilda here? She did a fabulous job in putting our annual report together with the whole team. Wilda, please stand up and be acknowledged, because this explains, I think, very well the holistic nature of what we do and our impact and flow in the community. Down there in the bottom right, you can see roughly the economic impact of the Workforce Partnership in our region alone. A big thanks to our funded partners, because part of what we do is some direct service, as well as then funding out a great deal of the dollars that we have to partners all over the county who do direct service with many, many people. And Tina on our team will be talking about our priority sectors, but part of our work is to do research, labor market studies, so that we understand what the jobs are, what it takes to get them, and so that we can provide those opportunities for job seekers to acquire those skills to get those great jobs. In the coming year, we have a lot of things on our list to do, but I just want to highlight a few of what we're focusing on. With the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that was authorized back, or signed into law in the middle of 2014, it kind of changes the landscape of how we work. We're implementing that. There's a lot of good stuff. Part of it is more of a focus on people with disabilities, more with out-of-school youth dollars. We have a new program serving exiting ex-offenders starting this month. Young adult employment is crucially important with Connected Careers and other programs that we run. We started a new program to serve long-term unemployed individuals that just kicked off this week. And the America's Job Centers of California, the Career Center network that we operate, is expanding its reach to provide more locations for people to access what we do. And with that, I'm done. So on to the panel. Thank you all for being here. I'm so envious of my friend at the end, because Mark has been on our workforce board for the last couple of years. He has the coolest title in the world, Vice President of Beer. Does it get any better than that? That's a job I aspire to. But until then, with that, back to you guys. Thanks.
Okay, so as most of you know, we'll get this, the introductions going quickly, but this is a little bit different panel this year. Roger and I have done this quite some time. You'll obviously get your fix on what's happening with the job market, what's happening with real estate, and overall what's happening not just here, but I think nationally as well. But we have a couple of different panelists, as people have talked about, and I like to call them technology and beer, and they will give us some insights into why San Diego is a hotbed for these. I did say, wait, are there samples for us? Maybe next time. But I think that 2016 presents us with some interesting economic conundrums. I mean, well, I think things are chugging along nicely here. You know, smack, look at what's happened with the markets. Not always an indicator of the economy, but certainly we're in correction territory there, and that's a talk of a lot of people looking at their portfolios. Commodities, somebody mentioned earlier oil, trading below like $30. What does that mean to us? We'll talk about that. As well as, China and the Middle East, geopolitical problems weigh heavily on the United States. And let's not forget that this is an election year. Does that mean anything to the economy? Do we care? What are those issues? So hopefully we'll have a spirited discussion of that, and maybe some more Chargers talk, but maybe not. So I'm going to bring up my colleague Roger Scholey to introduce the panelists.
Thanks, Diana, and welcome again to all of you today, and then also the people in the other room who couldn't fit into this room, so we all welcome you as well. Let me introduce all the panelists first, and then we'll get to the first group. As Mark has been mentioned a couple times, he's from Carl Strauss, Vice President of Beer. Next to him is Navrina Singh, Director of Product Management at Qualcomm. Corey Shepard, President this year of the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors. Tina No Bartel from the Workforce Partnership, Director of Business Programs and Research. Ryan Ratcliffe from the University of San Diego, Associate Professor of Economics at the School of Business. And Marnie Cox, our first speaker, Director of Special Projects at San Diego Association of Governments and a former member of our Econometer panel at the San Diego Union Tribune, who we missed every Sunday. Marnie is formerly the head chief economist at Sandag, now director of special projects, where he focuses on planning and completing large transportation infrastructure projects. Outside that, he participates in statewide discussions on proposed public policy actions that influence the long-term competitiveness of the local and state economies. So, Marty, why don't you kick it off?
Okay, thank you, Roger. And one of the things that I do at Sandag, I used to be the chief economist, now I'm doing capital projects, but I don't do stadiums. Okay, couple things. One, I need to bring a little bit of context to what's happened in 2015 so we can understand what's our springboard for the next year. So I'll do that first. I always like to bring my own context to the national forecast because sometimes my opinion's different than others, and so those filter down to the local economy. So at least, even if I'm wrong, you understand why I'm wrong. And then I'll focus on San Diego specifically and tell you what we think are going on there. I will start out with sort of just a brief comment, and that is, this is a really different kind of year where we have indicators or trends that look like, wow, sky's blue, sun's coming up, things are going well. We have other indicators that look like, man, a lot of storm clouds, right? Things are not looking so good, a lot of uncertainty. And historically, these two types of indicators have all moved in the same direction, but now they're moving in different directions. So it's a little bit different, right? So a little challenging for economists to try and put some of those clues together and come up with a story, right, that all fits together so people understand what's going on. I don't pretend to have that story, but I'm going to try to present that today. Well, to start with, in terms of what happened in 2015, maybe what we expected. And the storyline was, look, GDP growth is going to start to grow faster than what it has in the past. And that's been said 3 years in a row now, where we preached 3%. And with all that, we get more job growth. And with that additional job growth, we're going to see an acceleration of wages. And with that acceleration of wages, we're going to see an acceleration of inflation. And that would allow the Fed to raise interest rates. Well, the Fed did raise interest rates, but GDP growth was flat, didn't go anywhere. And the labor market, I'd have a hard time saying the labor market tightened, right? Took a look at wage growth, pretty flat across the board. Take a look at inflation, actually declined, right? Went down in terms of rates of growth. So interest rates did go up. Not bad, that's one right. Wrong reasons, but got that one right. Unexpected prizes, like I said, same old GDP growth, but I think this is on the price side of things, right? Not just oil, but across the board, commodity prices are falling. So much so that it has begun to impact countries, right? The Brazils, the Argentinas, the Russias. These are not just small amounts of changes that are taking place worldwide. These are large, and now it's begun to impact China, one of the fastest growing economies that we have. Those are some of the trends that have begun to emerge. And I'd say what caught everybody by surprise maybe was currency devaluations. And those don't appear to be over yet. The point behind currency devaluation, if you're going to be able to sell your products or resources to somebody else, you need to make the price lower, right, in order to keep up, especially as the demand diminishes, growth in the economy begins to slow, you've got to make your products look more attractive. Saudi Arabia has done this in spades, right? They don't want to give up market share. So they've continued to supply the market despite the falling price. And the last thing in terms of emerging trends, things look pretty good here in the US, but don't confuse that. We're just the tallest pygmy. Things are not exactly well in the US, especially on a historical basis, but on a relative basis, right? When you compare us with other parts of the world, we look pretty good. But that's just confusing where we should be with where we are, right, on a relative basis. The last point I will make here, because I know I'm limited in time in terms of my ability to get through all these slides, is that last point about interest rates. I actually think the Fed's going to have a tough time raising rates 3 or 4 times this year. Not that they won't, but I think they'll have a tough time. I don't think the price level will support their increases in interest rate. Interest rates are a function of inflation as well as real growth, and it's that inflation component because of price declines, which I think will hamper the ability of the Fed to actually move forward. And if things like the stock market, oil prices and things like that, the decline in employment in some of the goods production sectors, which have led to, a stalling and the decline in the manufacturing indices today, continue the way they're going, the U.S. could potentially head into recession sorts of territories or below 2% rates of growth, which are actually below our long-range average to begin with. So the Fed's going to have a tough job. Not that they can't do it. They can, right? But they'll have a tough job. Okay, some trends in terms of the national level, so you understand these were sort of on the positive trend. Lots of job growth. This past year, 221,000 new jobs per month, 2.6 million jobs over the year. Probably the best turnaround short of the 2014 that we've had. And it looks like next year, same kind of job growth, in excess of 200,000 jobs. That's really good. The other part, sales, right, which is an indicator of consumption, continuing to improve, about 2.2% on a year-over-year basis. One caveat here, I would say, is that there's 2 things that are going on that have significant influence. On the one is oil prices and gasoline. If you take a look at that and you exclude the energy sector from this, what happens is retail sales go from 2.2 to over 4%. And the reason for that is because you and I, as we're paying less for gasoline or energy items, haven't consumed more of them, right? Our consumption has been about the same and the price level has declined. On the other side, the auto industry, which is another significant driver of economic growth in the economy over the last few years. If you take out the auto industry, this thing falls to less than 0.2%. So the auto industry and oil prices, energy prices in general, really influencing what's going on here. So the future of those 2 will play heavily into whether or not this consumption continues. And the last trend there, sales or personal savings rates way up. That's a good thing. It's a very good thing in the long run. We all need to retire at some point, so we need the savings to be there. And post-World War II baby boom population is a good example of that. So savings going up is a good thing. But in the immediate term, takes money out of the expenditure stream, right? For every 1% increase in that savings rate, you lose about $400 billion in sales that year, right? So it is a long-term good thing, but in the immediate term, it's a reduction in the demand side. Okay, so here's about 3 lingering trends at the national level. One, we're growing below what they call full employment in the nation today. We're growing at 2%. We should be growing at 3+ if you look at the history over the last 30 or 40 years. That 1% reduction in the growth rate, if we're in an $18 trillion economy, is about $180 billion per year. We've been doing this for over 8 years now, right? So we're close to $1 trillion worth of lost output. That lost output are the jobs, the underutilized capacity here in the economy. All of those things are what are behind that lack of growth. The other thing that's going on that's a lingering trend is, although the unemployment rate has fallen, nationwide it's about 5%, locally about 4.8%, there are still some issues out there in the unemployment. There are things that are called part-time employment for economic reasons, still relatively high. People who would like to work full-time but can't find that full-time job, still relatively high. Long-term unemployment, people who have been unemployed for more than 27 weeks, is still large when you look comparatively. I'll talk more about the compatibility of job growth versus those who lost their jobs and whether or not those two match up on a structural basis. And then the last one is some discouraged workers, still relatively large compared to the last one. And this doesn't even count the 6 million people who have dropped out of the labor force between the ages of 25 and 55 who should be in there. Right? So there's a lot of things in the labor market, despite the job growth, despite the low unemployment rate, that are still issues. And the last one to point out is a trend that's been going on basically since the recession. We are seeing wage growth, especially at the top level. They seem to be doing well. But people at the lower end, even the medium, are not keeping pace. And so you can see here 2% rates of growth since about 2002 for the median and 25% profile. And then at the very high group, the 75% and above, about 6 to 8% rates of growth. So big differences there. Okay, let's take a look at San Diego. And as I mentioned earlier, a couple themes here. Things are looking pretty good on the one hand, and a little uncertain on the other, a little what I would call forecasting fog. Okay, take a look at the job growth. First, San Diego since 2012 has been doing really well, above 30,000 jobs per year, sometimes approaching 40,000. And let's compare that with the national level. We're about 1% of the nation, right? There's 320 million people nationally. There's 3.2 million people here in San Diego. Almost down the road, employment, housing, we're about 1% of the nation, almost all the way across. So if you want to find out how well you're doing relative to the nation, just look at the nation and multiply it by 1%. You'll have San Diego's answer. We've been doing relatively better than the nation in terms of job growth since about 2012. However, we have seen almost the same kinds of trends in hourly wages that the nation. Now, these are nominal, not real. The previous slide I showed you was real. There's been about 34% rates of inflation. So taking 34% of inflation off of a 30% growth rate, and the median and low end haven't actually stayed up with the real cost of living. They've declined. At the other end, the top 10% have in San Diego. Same kind of trend. So again, we're leading the US. Again, if you index this to 2007 when the recession started, are we above or below where we were when it started? And the index trends for both the nation as well as San Diego were better off than where we were, but San Diego was much better. So we're doing relatively better than the nation. However, not all industries are doing better. And so if you, again, you go back to 2007 and you fast forward to the latest numbers in November of 2015, you find this, where there's at least 5 major sectors: construction, manufacturing, trade, information, and finance, which all actually are below where they were in 2007 today. And a majority of the employment growth that has occurred in education and health services, over half, to the point about compatibility. Right? If the job losses in construction, right, and they're not back up to where they were, and you're looking for a new job and you're a construction worker, how well do your skills match up with the job growth, especially when over half of that job growth occurred in education and health services? Might help explain some of that long-term unemployment that's going on. So despite what looks like a lot of job growth, there may be incompatibility between those who lost their job, the skills that they have, and the new jobs that have been generated. Now, this has been going on to San Diego for a little while, so this takes us back to 1990 and then through 2011. 2 themes. One, we're producing about 6 times more low-paying jobs than high-paying jobs in San Diego. So you can imagine over the long run, that's going to drag down your average. Even when you add middle-paying jobs to low or to high income or high-paying wages, you're still at about a 2-to-1 ratio, where we're producing double the number of low-paying jobs than we are even the 2 middle brackets. The other thing that's clear about San Diego is that there is wage growth, but the wage growth between the two groups, or all the groups, is significantly different. 38% at the very top, 13% in the middle, and 14% at the low end. So big differences, a widening gap that's going, and this has been going on for some time. 2 important points: these are not the same people over time. There's been a lot of studies that shows that there's movement between industries. So these are not the same people. It's very important. But it does mean that the industries that are generating these jobs, right, are here in San Diego. We continue to invest in them. So that's why we're getting the job growth. And the second thing is, I'm not saying that there hasn't been any increase. There has, right? It's just that there's a dividing gap between those rates of growth in prosperity. On the housing side, a couple points, because I know someone's going to talk more in depth about it. First, disappointing year for housing permits. We thought we were going to get closer to 10,000, 12,000 permits. Sandag was expecting over the long run an average rate of growth of housing permits would be about 12,000 to accommodate our population growth. It looks like we're stalling out somewhere in the 8,000 to 9,000 permit levels. It's not multifamily units that's stalling out, it's single family units. The bars there, the red are multifamily, the blue are single family. You can see it's the group that has not responded, right, after the recession. It's the one that has not come back. So that lack of supply, right, has led to higher home prices. And you can take a look, for example, this lack of supply, even at the state level. Think about it on a very aggregate size. California makes about 12% of the nation's growth in population each year, and we represent about 6% of the housing permit activity. So over time, right, there are scarcer and scarcer number of housing units to accommodate a continuously growing population. The price of that product is going to rise, and it's become less affordable if incomes don't keep up with that price rise, which they haven't, and houses have become less affordable. On the sales tax side, about $55 billion in total sales here in San Diego. The biggest issue I see on that sort of right-hand side of the chart is the rate of growth per year has almost declined each year since we came out of the recession. We're tracking about 3% rate of growth this year, and that's actually relatively low when you compare it with job growth. One of the things that tracked really well in the past was job growth and sales tax revenue. And now we have them almost diverging in terms of rates of growth. Superb employment growth and mediocre to weak sales tax growth. We think there's a couple reasons for this. One, we think the peso devaluation. Did I do that? Yeah. Sorry. One, the peso devaluation. And we think a lot of people coming up from the border into San Diego to spend money is actually hampered by that peso devaluation that's taken place, as well as the tax increases that have occurred in Mexico and the Tijuana area. And the second reason, one of the reasons why we think the permit authorizations are low, especially for single family units, people are choosing to get a job here in San Diego, but they may be living in Southern Riverside, right, to take advantage of the single family units that are up there, relatively large inventory of single family units. And then the reason I put this slide up here are 2 things. Our emerging growth industries are very important to growth in the economy here. It was especially true in the 1990s, where there are actually 2 points in time where wage growth have increased very rapidly in San Diego. One was in the early 80s when the Reagan administration took office, doubled the defense budget at the national level, tripled the expenditures here, and the amount of jobs we had here took off dramatically. The other time was in the mid to late 1990s, where a lot of our emerging growth technology companies took off. Qualcomm being the most noted of the group there. But what we've seen over time is the venture capital component has not only become smaller, less than $1 billion in the last 2 or 3 years, but also our proportion of the total amount of venture capital funds that are actually being acquired across the nation have declined to somewhere between 1-2% from a high of about 5 or 6%. So big difference there. So the expectations that we had in the past about that particular group of companies being able to lead us out of the recession is probably a little bit diminished because of this. One of the real bright spots is trade with Mexico. This represents the amount of trade coming across Otay Mesa by trucks, about $36 billion or so, and since 1998, about a 6% compound annual rate of growth. So rule of 72, about every 9 years, it would double if it continues that. This is a very positive aspect. A lot of congestion at the border. If you've gone back and forth between the border, I know many of you are not truck drivers, but they're running into the same problems as the autos when they try to get across the border. So maybe one of the things we can talk about, Sandag's thinking about a third border crossing that would be paid for by tolls. Maybe we can talk about that as part of our questions. So last slide here, a little bit of detail on the forecast, and I just want to point out maybe a couple things. One, population rates of growth higher in San Diego than what we have seen in the most recent past. The reason for that is we've reduced the out-migration of people from San Diego. That seems to have slowed down, so less people are leaving. The second thing is on the job side, again, good job growth is what we're forecasting for San Diego. About 35,000 or so, a continued increase like we have seen over the last 4 years. But at the same point, sales tax revenue relatively weak. So that says I don't see much in the wage increases, and I see continuing problems with the peso being devalued, so a strong dollar in the international market will keep that sales tax component weak. Okay, let me stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Marnie. A lot to chew on. So we'll have some more numbers, I think, from Ryan Ratcliffe, who, as I said earlier, is involved in at the School of Business at University of San Diego. He specializes in forecasting, macroeconomics, and financial economics. His research includes formation and updating of microeconomic expectations, linkages between financial markets and macroeconomy, state and regional economic forecasting, and macroeconomic impact of housing. And before he speaks, I want to remind you that if you have questions for the panelists, any of them, jot them down on the pieces of paper that you can get from the monitors here, and they'll pass them out to us, and we'll ask the questions later on. So, Ryan Ratcliffe.
Okay, thank you. So I thought with my time today that I wanted to kind of comment on a few of the things that I get asked about a lot, more kind of themes, and this is primarily a view of the national economy, but I think a lot of these issues are relevant in San Diego. In 1 or 2 places, I will kind of bring this down to a more state and local level. But for the most part, it's just sort of, you know, what kind of things are on my mind in terms of where we've come through 2015 and things I'm thinking about in 2016. So we heard a couple of these already, but I'll provide a slightly different take. So the first, I think, is going back to this point that the recovery that we've seen at a national level, and this theme kind of goes down through the state and local level as well, is just significantly different than what we're kind of typically think of as a recovery. So to kind of give you a compare and contrast exercise, I lifted the graph on the left from my forecasting class, and there's a lot going on there that I probably don't want to get into, but I want to kind of just call your attention to the black line. That's the path of real GDP in the wake of the early 80s kind of double dip recession. Previous to what we had in 2008-9, this was kind of the worst recession that we've had since the Great Depression. We've since moved in second place now. But I think the striking thing here, that red line is kind of a notion of a long run trend in GDP that's about 3%. And the thing that really, I think, jumps out in that picture is from the bottom in 1982, we saw that this period of slow and slightly negative growth was followed by faster than average growth. We caught up, we recovered, right? This was sort of the Morning in America period, and that was a period where GDP was growing at more like 4 or even 5%. And that's kind of typically what we're thinking of when we think of a recovery. A recession is followed by faster than average growth, and we kind of catch up to a long run trend. So on the right now is kind of our more recent experience. The dotted lines there are just a couple of different suggestions for what the notion of the trend might be. The blue one is a 2.5% real GDP growth going all the way back to 1997. The red line is a more shorter 2% growth kind of extending out since 2001. And I think the message there in either case, we're treading water. There's not that period of faster than average growth following the recession that kind of catches us up to GDP. Marnie mentioned that we've got about a $1 trillion gap between what GDP is and what the Congressional Budget Office's notion of this long-run trend is. So we kind of trucked along at the steady 2% GDP growth. You hear a lot of people sort of say, maybe this is the new normal. Maybe that kind of 3% real GDP growth that is kind of the benchmark for what an average year looks like, maybe we're just not going to achieve those levels of growth anymore. And if that's the case, that's going to have implications for job growth and sales growth and equity returns, and that's going to ripple throughout the economy. So one of the things kind of, I think, on my mind for 2016 is just, are we in a new normal where 2% GDP growth is kind of what we should expect rather than this, all of our forecasts kind of build in a slightly faster rate of growth than that, and maybe we need to rethink that. Second item, Marnie mentioned this too, so I'm jumping off from a slightly different point, but making the kind of same general point here, and this is kind of my state and local slide here. So the graph on the left is sort of what we've looked like since November of 2009, which is kind of close to the bottom in terms of we lost all the jobs and now we're coming off of the bottom. It's ranked in order, if you kind of see the red bars going from big to small, this is the different NAICS sectors where we've seen job growth in San Diego. So that's kind of the ranking here. So we already made the point that education, healthcare, leisure, and hospitality have been two strong sources of growth. Professional technical services is, so as we've kind of, I've lined up the right picture just to show you what the average annual salaries are in this various sectors. And I think the thing that we see for San Diego and for California, and frankly, we see this at the US level as well, is that we've seen job growth in kind of the high wage, high skill sectors. So professional technical services is kind of the one that California and San Diego have a comparative advantage at relative to the nation. So we've seen some job growth there, but we see a lot of the job growth coming, as Marnie said, in these lower skill and lower wage sectors. So we've seen a lot of polarized job growth at the national level, the state level, and the local level. And then that's led to some of the trends that we saw in kind of the average wage growth. A lot of people, I think at the end of, this is one of those, I had to do this a little tongue in cheek because the presentation was written about a week and a half ago. So yeah, so a lot of worry about, are we reaching something? The word bubble comes up a lot. I think it frankly is an overused word for any time we're kind of, hey, things have been going well for a while, somebody brings up the word bubble. And so my take on this, first on the stock market, the number I like to look at is something that Bob Schiller from Yale calculates. It's a cyclically adjusted price to earnings ratio. PE ratios, fairly familiar idea for people who look at financial statements. And this is sort of one for the S&P 500 as a whole. So where we were at the end of 2015, there's a little bit of a lag in the data because of the earnings piece of this. So we're looking at the red line in that picture on the left. High by historical standards, but I think when you look at kind of where we were at the end of the 90s, where that ratio was 45, 26 is certainly, a fairly high valuation for earnings, and part of that is just because interest rates have been so low, the point that, that we're making with the blue line there. But, I think, this was a kind of getting to the point of some potential for stock correction. Yeah, this was like if I could have that statement back and have written it yesterday instead of a week and a half ago. We're down about 7.5% since the end of December in the S&P 500. So that ratio has come down a bit. But again, I think this is more kind of your garden variety bear market as opposed to epic collapse of 2008 or like we saw at the end of the 90s in the stock market. And I think I'm showing a slightly different flavor of a home price index. This is the one that's put out by housing regulators, but it's very similar idea to the Case-Shiller index, as we saw from some of Marnie's statistics. 5% growth, kind of, I think, over the last year and a half in terms of sales prices. This is the number for San Diego. Again, I'm not feeling like that is the 15% kind of bubble that we were talking about in 2005, 2006. This is maybe if there is going to be trouble in the housing market, I think it's going to be, again, more of the kind of thing that you might have seen at the in the early 90s, where you see maybe a decline in volume and very slow price growth, but not the huge surge in foreclosures and distressed sales that led to the significant declines in prices. So again, I think we all kind of have the last recession in mind, and if people are talking about a bubble in housing, that's immediately where your mind goes. Again, I just sort of want to say that I don't think what we're seeing is anywhere deserves the phrase bubble, but if you want to take the, what's kind of the worst case scenario here, I think that would be what I might expect to see in the housing market, lower sales and flat prices rather than the kind of foreclosure surge we saw in 2008. As a macro forecaster, probably the most common question I get asked is, are we going to have a recession sometime in the foreseeable future here? So I think there are a lot of people who just watch the calendar and sort of think in terms of a cycle, per se. And we are actually getting into the longest period of time since the last recession. If you kind of look at all the recessions since World War II, just in terms of how much time has elapsed, we're getting to this recovery. Again, I can't call it an expansion, but this kind of trudging recovery that we've had is fairly long in the tooth by historical standards. And so some people start to wonder, is there a recession on the horizon? And I like to look, different kind of early warning indicators here, and I think the two that are most sensible to me, I always point out housing and cars. The reason these make sense as leading indicators is these are some of the biggest purchases that households make. They're almost always financed, and they're always going to have a very forward-looking component. How do I think my income's going to hold up over the next couple of years? Am I going to be able to service this debt that I'm taking on? And I think on the housing side, consistent with some of the permit activity story that Marnie showed, housing starts in the U.S. as a whole are still kind of below what we would consider the average level of home construction by historical standards. Almost every recession we've had since World War II, with the exception of two, have been preceded by a big run-up in home construction, and then you can see the gray bars didn't come out all that well. But kind of a peak and then a fall in housing construction typically precedes the beginning of most recessions by about 9 months. So based on what I see from housing starts, that is not what the typical kind of 9 months before a recession looks like. So the housing market's not really giving me any worry about recession. The other one is cars. Car sales are high, but I think in part that's just driven by car sales were lower than we had ever seen for longer than we had ever seen coming out of the recession. I think a lot of us just chose to, a new car is a little bit of a luxury. I'm not thinking of, I'm not feeling all that certain about my future income. I'm just going to drive my beater into the ground. And cars are a little more durable than they used to be. So rolling around in a 10-year-old car was not quite the risk that it used to be. So I think, again, without seeing a peak and decline in auto sales, I think these two leading indicators that have been fairly reliable in the past, so again, we're talking about 9 months. Kind of over the 9-month horizon based on what we see right now, I don't see a lot of sign for worry, but again, these are going to be two of the things that I'm keeping a close eye on in 2016 as we kind of update that forecast. So I think the last thing, Marnie mentioned it a little bit, technically macroeconomists are going to call this an international freakout. It's really, international is always very kind of a double-edged sword when you think about the impact that international turmoil is going to have on the US economy. So there are two things that I think have really emerged over 2015. A substantial, so the graph on the left is just showing kind of what is the value of the dollar as a weighted average of all the different countries that we trade with. And the dollar has strengthened dramatically in the last year to year and a half. And a lot of that is just people around the world are looking for a safe place to park their money in view of global turmoil, whether you're thinking about this as worries about the Eurozone, or whether you're thinking about this more recently as what's going on in China. And the US is on the receiving end of a lot of that money. On the right, you can kind of see specific to China here over the last year or so. This is basically the pile of dollars and other currency that the Chinese central bank is holding, and you can see that that's been declining several months in a row and had a very, very large decline in the last month. They're spending that money to defend the value of the Chinese currency, right? This is sort of an issue of there are a lot of people moving out of Chinese currency into other currencies, which would typically cause the value of the Chinese currency to fall, and the Chinese central bank is spending some of their reserves to prop up that money. So, you know, the two of these together are money moving out of China, and I think more generally around the world, we're seeing a lot of foreign money move into the US, and the stronger dollar as a result of that. And that is a very, like, a lot of people think strong must automatically be good, and with international things, there's always two sides to it. So the good news of all of this money coming into the US is it's gonna keep US interest rates low, right? There's more money around there in the pool to be lent to all the people that wanna borrow it. So in particular, as the Fed is raising interest rates on the short end, this larger and larger supply of international money is gonna mean that we maybe don't see the same rise in long-term interest rates that you might have thought we would have based on kind of historical standards. On the other hand, though, a stronger dollar means that US goods are more expensive for foreigners, and that's gonna put a pinch on US exports, right? So there's sort of a good news for financial markets that we seem to be the tallest pygmy, as you said, the one safe haven in a world of international turmoil, but it also is gonna hold back growth in one of the components of GDP. So all of these are just kind of, again, things that I hear people discussing. I wanted to kind of throw out a couple of data-based takes on that, but I'm happy to, if you have any questions about any of these, want to get into it further, please fill out a question card, and we can discuss it kind of among the panel. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ryan. Finally, for our first panel, Tina Bartel. Again, she's from the San Diego Workforce Partnership. She manages the labor market research department there, which analyzes workforce needs and trends for educators, trainers, employers, and researchers. She also oversees the business and services department, providing wage and training and reimbursement programs for San Diego employers. So, Tina, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I oversee the business programs and research departments at the San Diego Workforce Partnership. When you're a workforce development professional, you talk a lot about the skills gap. Some people say there is a skills gap, and other people say there is not a skills gap. Well, it doesn't matter what side of the conversation you're on, there is one problem that the region really still needs to address. There are a lot of people who still remain unemployed, and there are a lot of employers who are trying to fill job openings at their companies. So how do we know that there's a lot of people who are unemployed when our unemployment rate has been reported to be at one of its lowest levels since 2005? Well, this is what we call the U3 unemployment rate. This encompasses people who have been looking for work in the past 4 weeks. So if you're long-term unemployed who've been looking for work for over 27 weeks, or if you have been looking for work for more than 4 weeks, or you're underemployed where you're working part-time but you want full-time work, you're not counted in this number or in this percentage. Experts would argue a more accurate version of the unemployment rate is the U6 unemployment rate, which encompasses those people who are part-time employed, who want to get full-time employment, and those who are long-term unemployed. When you look at the U6 measure in 2014 for California, it was more than double the official unemployment rate that was reported by the media. Although we don't have the exact numbers in San Diego County for those people who are unemployed, we can make some estimates and what that unemployment number looks like in San Diego. Our team looked at the total working age population in San Diego County, people who are in the ages of 16 to 64. That's not counting people who are over 65 that still want to work. Out of the entire total working age population, we compared it with the official reported number of people who are actively looking for work in the labor force. What we found was that about 64% of people were participating in the labor force when they were of the working age population in 2005. In 2014, that percentage dropped 5 points, 5%. So if we had the same rate of level of participation as we did in 2005, we would add about 700,000 people to the labor market in San Diego County. That's if they were all willing to work and able to work. Again, this is just an estimate, but even half that number is a lot of people who are still unemployed in San Diego County. So what is the workforce development system doing about this? If you're not familiar, the workforce development system consists of our local governments as well as all of these partners listed up here. The Workforce Development Board are boards all across the nation funded by the Department of Labor to develop employment and training programs and invest in programs that help job seekers meet the needs of current job openings and employers. In San Diego County, our local Workforce Development Board is the San Diego Workforce Partnership. We have about an annual budget of $30 to $40 million a year to invest into job and employment training programs in San Diego County. We do a lot of research before we invest, so we study the labor market, as I have just shown you. But we don't only study the labor market, we also study best practices across the nation. One of the best practices is the program called Platform to Employment. So let's say you've been long-term unemployed for over 27 weeks, or you've exhausted your unemployment benefits. If you go to this program, you're enrolled into about a 5-week boot camp where you get upgraded in the skills that are relevant to the current workforce right now. And we provide support such as career coaching and emotional support for the difficulties of the long-term unemployed. And we also, if you haven't written a resume in over 10 years, we help you with that as well. So after this 5-week-long intensive boot camp, you're placed in an 8-week-long employment experience. This experience is essentially an internship program for an employer. It's at no risk to the employer because we subsidize the wages of that individual or of your wages. And you get to have this 8 weeks to prove to an employer that you can do the job and you're a good fit for the company. Upon completion of this subsidized employment, if you're a good fit with the company and they want to hire you, they put you into full-time employment without that subsidy. We're happy to say that in 2013, when we launched our pilot project, we placed 100% of the people who were in subsidized employment into full-time jobs. And with the workforce development system, the more people we get placed into employment, the more money we could bring into the region. So we brought in more money to train 4 more cohorts this year. So in 2016, our new target population is the long-term unemployed. So if you know somebody who's been long-term unemployed or have exhausted their unemployment benefits, encourage them to apply to our Platform to Employment program. So we mentioned earlier about a lot of part-timers. So those who are unemployed. What about the people who are taking multiple part-time jobs to make ends meet? Well, we're facing this new phenomenon called the gig economy, or the freelance economy, the 1099 contract economy, or the on-demand economy. You know those Uber drivers that come to you on demand and they pick you up and take you where you need to go? Well, this new gig economy is basically you take as many part-time jobs as you can to make ends meet. Some people do it as a lifestyle, but others do it because they cannot find full-time jobs. However, we know there are a lot of full-time jobs out there in San Diego County. We see hiring signs like this all over the region. And when our team looks at online job postings, the number of online job postings have increased dramatically since 2010. Although I do caution that when you look at online job postings data, to just look at the trend and not look at the actual number. Because a lot of times, even though we try to deduplicate the number of job postings an employer would post across multiple job sites, they do get, fall through the cracks and they might get counted more than once. Especially if a job posting has been up for several months and an employer can't fill it and they repost it, they might get captured here. But the key takeaway is that there are a lot of job openings out there that employers are trying to fill. So again, what are we doing to close the skills mismatch? Well, in 2016, our biggest outlook and investment are what we called earn and learn models, or sometimes you learn and then you earn. The idea is to raise awareness, to educate the job seekers of where the jobs are at, but also to lower the risk of employers when they're hiring. Let me give you an example. We have an internship program called Connected Careers. Our Connected Careers program connects the youth to openings that are internship programs that employers have available to them. We screen the interns or the young job seekers, and we take them through an intensive work readiness training. So by the time they get to you, the employer, you're not saying they don't have the right soft skills, they're not showing up on time, because we vetted all of that and we trained them so they're ready for the workforce. Just recently, we were awarded money from the county through their Community Action Partnership to fund what is called an externship. So if you're an employer and you don't want to take the risk, for whatever risk that you might think of that would come with an internship, liability and all of that, you might want to think of an externship. I call it a light version of an internship program. An extern basically job shadows you for a short amount of time, so the risk is a lot shorter. It's about 22 hours for our program. These are young individuals who are currently in school, so they're with you during their winter or spring break. They job shadow you to learn about your day-to-day operations, what you do as a professional, so they have a sense of the world of work. And the county paid for the wages, so essentially you get free labor for a short-term project, and you get someone who knows about your company who can pitch and advertise it to the youth. So I really recommend externships for people who are willing and able to provide job shadowing experiences for the youth. This year, too, we're pushing out apprenticeship programs. Our workforce development dollars can fund both the in-classroom training portion and the on-the-job training portion of an apprenticeship program. So if you're an employer who wants to sponsor an apprentice, we can subsidize the wages of that apprentice if they're eligible for our funding. Nowadays, as you might have heard in the news, apprenticeship programs are across industries and across a variety of occupations. They are no longer just with the traditional trade occupations that we might be familiar with in terms of apprenticeships. Miramar College, for instance, recently got a grant to develop life sciences apprenticeship programs. That's amazing for San Diego County. And we're seeing more of these types of apprenticeship programs in high tech. And Miramar College is training regulatory and quality affairs professionals. So I encourage you, if you're an employer who's thinking about your talent pipeline, work with us. We can help you create apprenticeship programs, and we'll see what kind of subsidy that we can provide you. Finally, one of the programs that we are very excited about is called Customized Training. This program is basically from conversations with employers. Whenever we talk to employers, they say, you know what, I can't find these people to be trained the right way that I want them to be trained. If you just give me the money myself, then I can train them for my own company. Just let me train them. That's what we did. We give money to employers who are looking to train and then hire from their own training programs. Kitchens for Good just recently took advantage of our customized training dollars. They opened a facility in the Jacobs Center, and they wanted to hire a few cooks. So in their training program, once the cooks finish their training, Kitchens for Good hires them with that guaranteed job at the end, and they have a list of employers who are waiting to hire from that training cohort. So there's a guaranteed job at the end of these types of training programs. And all of these programs are really catered to what we call middle skill jobs, positions that are between a high school diploma and less than a 4-year degree. The reason why we're catering towards the less than 4-year degree and high school diploma is that since 2001, we found that those types of jobs have had the most growth in the county. And within those jobs, a lot of them fall into what we call our priority sectors. This is the research that we did in October 2014 with the community colleges. We found that these 5 sectors are driving our economy, and they're projected to add a lot of employment growth to the region. If you're interested about that information, go visit our reports page or our labor market dashboard. But remember, it's about awareness. A lot of these job postings that we saw should have really been trained for about a year ago, or even more than that. So we are going around the county and presenting about these job opportunities, not just to adult job seekers, we're presenting to the youth as well. In November, we presented to over 150 career counselors, educators, and teachers from the San Diego Unified School District. Hopefully they take that information and bring it to their students. We didn't only educate them about the upcoming jobs, but we talked about the growing apprenticeship movement. Apprenticeship programs allow individuals to go through a different career pathway, but still pretty much end up at a level of someone who would go through a 4-year degree. And we educated the educators about this in hopes that they will share this with their students, because we predict that there will be a lot of apprenticeship programs in the region and throughout the nation. Because we've been presenting this all over the region, we've been invited up to Vista Unified School District to present our priority sectors, our apprenticeship programs, and other ways we can collaborate and connect the world of work It's a K-12 education. In workforce development, we get a lot of questions about minimum wage. Who's going to be affected? What industries are going to be affected negatively or positively about this? Well, the San Diego Workforce Partnership, we did not take a stance on whether or not the minimum wage should remain or raise, but we do encourage employers who might be reluctant to hire because of the risk that comes with the financial responsibility of taking on a new hire to take advantage of our wage reimbursement. If you are hiring and the person you're hiring is eligible for our funding, we can reimburse up to 50% of that person's hourly wages for 1,040 hours or 6 months. So if you're worried about the financial risks, try to see if that person is eligible for funding and take a chance with them. I want to leave one call to action for you all today. If you know somebody who is currently long-term unemployed or who have exhausted their unemployment benefit, ask them to register or apply for our Platform to Employment program. If you know of someone who might benefit from knowing what industries are growing in their region, or if you even want us to go out there and present to those folks, contact us or visit our reports page. Or even better, we have a new data dashboard called lmi.workforce.org created by senior analyst Kelly, and that database has all of the information I presented to you today. And if you know of a youth who wants or who maybe needs work experience or exposure to the world of work, connect them to our Connected Careers program. And if you're an employer who wants to hire but might be reluctant because you are still trying to meet payroll but you want some help, take advantage of our training and wage subsidies. Thank you very much for your time.
Great, that's excellent for our first panel. Thank you so much, all three of you. So the questions you are submitting we'll ask in the second part of the program, but now we're going to, Diane and I will sort of explore a little bit more deeply what the first three panelists had to say. So Diane, do you have a question to start out with?
I'm actually going to give a question that I had, but somebody else wrote down, so I'm going to sort of go ahead and use this one. And again, we have until 10 o'clock for this first round, but we're going to take more questions later, so we'll have a break from 10 to 10:15 after this. But this is, I guess, as to Marnie, and the question is, how do water pollution, traffic, and energy issues in San Diego County affect the economy going forward?
Is this on? Yeah, okay. I'd say a couple things about it. First of all, on the energy side, the decline in oil prices or energy in general have been very positive. Less positive in California because we do have rules and regulations here that force us to make gas with certain ingredients that lower greenhouse gas emissions. So for example, as opposed to $2 for per gallon gas you see nationwide, sometimes below $2, we're closer to $3, right? It's come down from $4, but not all the way to $2. So there has been some savings, right, to consumers, but not nearly as amount that we might see elsewhere. On the water side, maybe two comments on that. County Water Authority, in its ability to diversify our sources of water, have done a superb job. If you look statewide where we have mandatory rationing going on, our water authority is saying, look, we're okay here. We actually don't need to ration our water. We've done enough work over the past decade to handle the crisis that we're in today. On the other hand, I'd say one of the other items that has been talked about is the impact on agriculture from the water crisis. And this doesn't appear to be significant as of yet. If you look at the job generation and production going on in agriculture, hasn't really been impacted greatly. The other point about agriculture, to give it some idea of levels of importance, it's probably about 2-3% of the state economy. There are actually single firms in Silicon Valley that are bigger than the entire agricultural sector in California. So we have to keep in mind that some of the water flows and usage, what you're trying to do is figure out how to generate high-paying jobs or things like that, the allocation of those resources become important in terms of your return on the use of those resources. So just sort of keep that in mind that the agriculture is a relatively low contributor to the overall state economy. I didn't say it's not important. We all like to eat, but as a contributor to prosperity, relatively low.
Let me see, Tina, let me ask you something about the one person sent in on, they encouraged the public to send in questions in advance. So this came from someone who wanted to know, how is the job market looking for recent college graduates in both STEM and non-STEM fields? That's the science, technology,
Engineering and mathematics.
and math.
Yeah.
So what are the prospects there?
So whenever we look at job postings, we look at that as on-demand or real-time data. And a lot of the job postings right now are showing software developers, of course. We're hearing software developers, programmers. We're hearing a lot of employers talk about engineering occupations that haven't been filled. And all of our industry sectors in San Diego County that are moving towards high tech are hiring those engineering and software developing positions. So we have blue tech or the maritime industry. We have advanced manufacturing. Even though it's manufacturing, it's advanced and requires high level of computer expertise. We have information and communication technologies. So companies that build software, sell software, or just produce software within their own companies, they're hiring all over. So I would encourage, at least if you have a youth that you know of that wants to program, or even if they're interested in video games, they are going to be great if they can learn how to code right now.
And Tina, let me ask a follow-up to that. One thing that's new in the last few years, as most of you know, is that this popularity of online job postings. And that is, it's sort of like college applications. Now people send in 100 resume requests rather than 10. And I can imagine employers are inundated, flooded with so many resumes. How can they possibly pick who they should hire? Do you have a suggestion for job seekers on how to stand out among the millions of applications that employers get? Is it the old-fashioned networking? Can they do, resumes are fine, but that isn't where it ends, is it?
Well, we can always go through the traditional route of submitting a job application, but as always, networking is the best bet to go. Because employers are inundated with all of these resume applications, and there's a number of resumes that might look really good, and then when they come in for the interview, they aren't a good fit with the company. But when you network with them or talk to an employer who's hiring, then the employer can know that you are a good fit for the company. I'll give you an example. When we had some layoffs recently in the information and communication technologies industry sector, we had a networking event for employers to meet with people who recently were laid off in that ICT sector, meet up at Duckfoot Brewing. Sorry, we should have done it at Karl Strauss. But it was a casual environment where these employers were able to interact with these job seekers, and they knew how they would be outside of a work environment, whether or not they were still professional, and at a brewery at that. So that networking piece is very crucial. And remember, you're working with this individual for more than 8 hours a day. You want to like them. So I really recommend for job seekers to continue that networking aspect, and there's a lot of those available.
So more beer, I guess, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, this question comes from the audience, and maybe Ryan, you could take this one. Why so little attention paid to the historically low labor participation rate? And then, is the economy sustainable over the long term when so many employable people choose not to work and exist on income transfers?
Okay, labor force participation rate, I think civilian, the employment to civilian population ratio, these are kind of the two indicators that we look at to see labor force participation. Just to provide a little bit of, without the graph, what I remember it looking like is it kind of peaked somewhere in the middle of the 90s. It's been drifting sideways until the recession hit, and then we saw a pretty precipitous decline in labor force participation at the national level, and I think that's mirrored at the state and local levels. Depending on where you look, it's either been kind of holding steady at this new lower level or has come up off the bottom a little bit, but is still substantially below where it used to be. And frankly, one of the big arguments among economists right now is what's kind of driving that. Some of it is definitely just demographics, right? We're moving now into the age where we're seeing the kind of the front end of the baby boom wave reaching retirement age. Whether or not you can still retire at 65, whether it's economically viable to do so based on what your pension or retirement looks like, your longer life expectancy, right? This is kind of a moving target in this discussion. But some of it is just basic demographics rather than so when we've, I think last year I put this in one of my slides but didn't choose to do it this year. When you kind of break out cohort by cohort, so 25-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 35-year-olds, all the way through the population pyramid, where have the biggest changes in labor force participation been? The two things we see are that some of the biggest declines have been the 20-year-olds, and some of the biggest increases have been the 65 to 70-year-olds. So we're seeing people working longer, and we're seeing that a lot of the labor force participation issues kind of fell on the shoulders of students just getting out of either high school or college. And I mean, that's certainly consistent with kind of my experience watching the graduates of 2009 and 2010 facing a little bit of an upward fight in terms of getting a job straight out of college. I think the situation for the kind of the 20-year-olds, at least for the college graduate 20-year-olds, is better than it was 4 years ago, but it's still a little bit rougher, and I think some of that is just the you know, we're a wash and job app. It's easy. It's low cost to apply for a job. You got to hustle. You got to get out and network more, where it used to be, you know, my personal experience is that there are an awful lot of college seniors who think, okay, I fulfilled my social contract. I went to college. Therefore, the magical job that gets me $120,000 a year is supposed to be delivered to me with my diploma. Thank you very much. Right? So this ideal that the hustle is just starting when you hit your senior year is kind of often a difficult transition to make. So we're seeing, like I say, I think what's going on with 20-year-olds in terms of living at home a lot longer and all that, there's a lot of moving parts to why labor force participation is substantially lower. But I do think the trend is, I don't think we're going to recover back to where we were in 2004 in terms of labor force participation. I think this is kind of the new normal, and a lot of that, I think, just goes back to, again, the share of, you know, 65-year-olds versus 20-year-olds and so on.
Thanks. One thing I think is kind of common to some of your presentations is the way we measure things. For example, you talk about cars and housing as being the indicators of the economy, and I wonder whether some of these old-fashioned economic leading indicators are the right ones any longer. Another thing about, as Marty said, the 3% GDP long-term growth of the U.S. seems to be more to the ceiling rather than the average. So what do you, and it seems like the U.S. and California and San Diego are all heading toward the European stagnant, flat growth level rather than what we're used to over the last 50 years. So can you talk about, from your economist standpoint, in the sense of maybe we're not looking at the right figures anymore? Martin, you want to try that? Or?
Sure. I think the point you're bringing up, if you're not careful about the current trends, you may end up there in the end. And I guess I'd point to the fact that some of the trends are self-imposed, right? I mean, some of the things that we're seeing either in the labor market or on the prosperity side, education, skill, training, that kind of stuff, are a little bit on the self-imposed side. Remember I mentioned about California, right? How different we are, why home prices are so high. We're not building enough homes. I mean, it's pretty simple, and what's creating the backlog and not developing enough homes is really our environmental regulations, right? And there's a lot of people who don't want houses built next to them. And so they've imposed these regulations, right, that put an onerous amount of work on developers to do that. Rightly or wrongly, if you happen to live there and don't want that development, you're right? But if you're wrong in terms of the long-run ability of the state to sustain itself, I think. So part of this answer about measurement is a change, right, in the way that we're actually doing things. We could end up a lot like Europe if we continue down the path. Good example of this, fracking, right? This lowered oil prices substantially, right? Consumers benefit by that action. But the fear was it raises greenhouse gas emissions. So despite the apparent prosperity that would come along from an invention like this, right, that we could all benefit from, You remember oil independence for America, so we're not subjected to the imports from areas that we don't necessarily politically agree with, is sort of put by the wayside, right, for relatively long-term concepts, right, that some people agree with, some people disagree with. But the point is it sends a message to the market about your ability to bring creative destruction to the marketplace and benefit from it. Last point. During the recession itself, we actually kept the automobile industry alive, right? The government subsidized it in order to move forward with it. Think about what was going on at that time. This is when Tesla was just being started. There were a lot of companies who were thinking about getting into the automobile industry business. Apple's another one. And what they were looking for was labor, right, as well as a market for new types of products that may be available. Well, the U.S. chose to maintain its old product line by subsidizing GM and subsidizing Chrysler, as opposed to allowing creative destruction to take over, right? And potentially, remember the demand for autos is still going to be there, right? The question is who supplies that, right? Is it somebody who comes to the table with a new idea that's more consistent with the kinds of things like battery-powered cars, or do we continue the executives who have done gas-powered cars all along? We chose labor, right? I mean, that was the idea. Let's not let anybody else become unemployed. Even though it's a transition to a new type of economy, we chose differently. So part of these problems in our measurement are, in essence, things that we impose on ourselves. So looking at them slightly differently might give us a slightly different answer.
Let's get on with our next panel. Our first speaker will be Corey Shepard, President of the Greater San Diego Association of Realtors. Corey spent first years of his career selling real estate and being a working owner. He accepted a position as general manager for an entrepreneurial Coldwell Banker company, Coldwell Banker West, in April 2013. They operate Point Mortgage Bank in California Preferred Escrow and have an ownership in a local title company. They have 3 branches in South County and are currently expanding into El Cajon and downtown San Diego. So Corey is going to give us an update on the housing market and tell us whether we can afford to buy a house this year.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here today, and I appreciate the invitation. So I'll give you an update on the real estate market, where we are, where I think we're going to go in 2016 and a little bit beyond. So the forecast for 2016 and beyond will be mine, so if I get it right, hopefully you might invite me back. And if I get it wrong, don't blame the San Diego Association of Realtors because they don't forecast. All right, so let me give you an overview of some key indicators, and let me start with that. The real estate market really bottomed late in the fourth quarter of 2009. And we've been in a recovery ever since, but the first 2 years of that recovery was almost non-existent. We just kind of bumped along the bottom of a recovery between 2009 and 2011, and since 2011 on, the real estate market's really been much more healthy. So where are we now? So in 2015, the number of sold listings of detached homes, so the numbers of properties sold, increased by 7% over 2014. So that was a pretty good increase. And the number of attached homes, condominiums that sold, increased by almost 10%. And I think the reason that the attached homes outpace single-family residences is because of price, and because they are now more affordable in monthly payment than the single-family residence, which has increased quite a bit in price over the last few years. So those are pretty healthy increases from 2014 to 2015. Also, I think there's a further indication that the demand for housing remains strong, and the numbers were up potentially due also to clearer mortgage rules. So over the last few years, if you didn't need a loan, you could get one. And now it's with clearer guidelines for getting a mortgage, they're easier for borrowers to qualify for those who can, in fact, qualify. One thing that we were worried about this year was what would happen when the new TILA-RESPA regulations under Dodd-Frank took effect, and would that slow down the rate of the housing economy because escrows would be stalled, we thought, for as much as 30 to 45 days because of regulations and the industry getting used to the regulations. So far, right now, we're in the honeymoon period, which started on October 3rd of last year, and we haven't really seen a slowdown. We've had a few instances where escrows have been delayed, but not to the point that anybody expected. What's still yet to be seen is when the CFPB finds any violations with lenders, will they start issuing very heavy-handed fines? If that happens, then we might see a slowdown because I think lenders will be even more careful at that point, but I think they've been very careful up to now. So median price increased on detached homes about 6.5% this year above where they were, and in the attached range, 6.2% above where they were throughout this year. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of minutes. Listing inventory. This is a real strange one, is that listing inventory has stayed very low for the last couple of years. And I think one of the main reasons for that is that the building industry, as Marty mentioned, has not recovered and come back in the way that it normally does following a recession and into recovery. So we need that building market to help make the move-up market for the residential resale market. And so we're lacking a lot still in that move-up market. So let's take a look at closed units. So here's a chart that shows you the last 3 years of closed residential units, both detached and attached, and you can see that it's bounced along a little bit, but there's no significant increases in the numbers of properties that are being sold. And we say in residential that every time a new home is built, that creates 2 more transaction sides in the residential market. It creates the buyer who's moving up in their home to sell, and then it creates a home for usually an entry buyer or another move-up buyer to move to. So there's like 2 sides of a transaction there in residential, and we're missing that still in the numbers. And you can see that the percentage of growth for 2014 was negative in sales units, and then 15 bounced back to the positive, but probably not near to where it could because we still have a lot of shortage. You can also see the big increase that we had in 2013, and I think that was really the end of the cycle of the foreclosure market and any, what they term shadow industry, moving through the market, being bought by investors. And during that time, up to about 2013, it was hard for the average home buyer to purchase a home because they were competing against investors who were paying all cash for their properties. And sellers preferred that because it was a sure transaction versus somebody who had to qualify for a loan when it was very difficult to be able to get a loan. So over the last 2 years, it's become better for home buyers. There has been some more selection on the market, but they're not competing with the investor the way that they used to. So looking at median sales price, in 2014 and 15, we really re-entered the atmosphere, I think, following 2012 and 13, and even 11 when we had really large spurts of growth. 2012 and 2013, we had double-digit appreciation in the market, and now we're back down to single-digit appreciation, which I think is a very healthy thing because we can't continue at that rapid pace and not have something happen conversely on the other side of that at some point. So we're at a much more realistic growth level right now, and that's good, and it should be sustainable for a little bit more into the economic cycle for housing, and I'll give you at least my projections and what I've found to watch over the years to indicate when we might see a downturn again. So what's happening? How long does it take to sell a property? A couple of years ago, it could take anywhere from about a minute to a week or so to sell a property. We're now getting into more normalized market times for the market. So in 2014 versus 15, we've had about an 8% decrease in the amount of days that it takes to sell a property, and that's about a 12.6% decrease in market time. So you can see on this chart that around July of this year, we hit the low of about 40 days on the market, and we've been ticking up ever since. So we'll continue to watch that trend in 2016. Normal market times are usually between about 60 and 70 days, so we're still below normal market time to sell a home. For those in the industry, and sometimes for our sellers, it feels like right now it's taking a long time at 54 days in December, even though it's below the norm. And that's because we tend to remember back a year and 2 years ago when things were selling so rapidly as soon as they hit the market. So this is an index I'll talk about for a little bit called the Historical Affordability Index. And I think this is an index, if you'll watch, that you can determine when there may be a recession coming in real estate combined with the month's supply of inventory in the market. So this compares the state as well as the county-wide lines for the Historical Affordability Index. This Housing Affordability Index you can find at the California Association of Realtors website, which is car.org. And their methodology for this index is to look at, out of 100 households, based upon the California median price, based upon a borrower having a 20% down payment, and with a housing payment that doesn't exceed 30% of the borrower's income, how many households can afford to buy a home? And of course, this increases in the median price or in interest rates will affect and drop the affordability rate if wages aren't keeping up with increases of appreciation in housing. And again, I think our demand has been higher than where wage levels have been, so we're watching that affordability index fall right now. Typically in the state versus San Diego County, in the state it's usually overall about 4 to 5 points higher than San Diego. So we're a more expensive place to live, as we would expect with our beautiful geography and our weather, than other places in the nation. So if you look for purposes of projecting when a recession might happen, if we were to look at November of 1989, the affordability index was in the low 20s. And this was the beginning of the recession, and what clued that was that there was more than 8 months worth of inventory on the market. So when you see 8 months worth of inventory and you see this affordability index in the very low 20s or even dropping well into the teens, those things together historically have indicated that we are in a recession at that point. And then again, if we looked at February 2007, the detached home supply increased above 8 months, and the affordability index was at 13, and we were in a recession at that time. So I think putting those two together gives you a pretty good indication. So where are we right now? Oops, sorry, did I go the wrong way? I have that upside down. All right, so this shows where we were in 2006 at 12% and where we were as of the last report into the third quarter 2015 at 29. We're currently at 24. So we're currently at 24 points. So here's month's supply of inventory. Now, usually with affordability falling to about where it is, we would have more supply already on the market. But this is one of the economic indicators that isn't following suit quite the way it normally does. So we have a tremendous shortage of supply on the market. Perspective of a normal market, by the way, is if you have 5 or 6 months worth of inventory. Then when you go north of 7 months, you have to watch carefully. Once you hit that 8 months, you're definitely in a recession if it hasn't backed off as long as you have low affordability. So we've been experiencing this inventory shortage for about 3 years now, and we were building a little bit, and then all of a sudden in December again, it fell. And so for detached homes, we have a 2-month supply. For attached homes, we have a 1.4-month supply, which is very low, and that simply means if no other properties came on the market, we would have no inventory at all in 2 months for detached or 1.4 for attached. All right, so I'm running out of time, so let me move ahead here. So this gives you more months supply in different areas of the county. You can tell that the well-priced areas of the county, South County, East County, are the ones that typically have more supply. Median price changes. So we've had growth across the county, some more than others. South County, again, because of price and affordability, and East County has grown at a higher rate. Interesting, attached homes in downtown San Diego decreased over last year on the median price. And I think that's just an indication of affordability as well, and that area becoming price sensitive. Took a quick look at the luxury market. In the luxury market, the $1 to $2.5 million price range last year was actually down a little bit in median price, but the $2.5 to $5 and the $5 to $10 million price range was up, I would say, normal and substantially on the top end. As that money freed up, the stock market did well, and usually the luxury market absolutely follows the stock market. So projections for 2016, what will happen in prices? I think overall, you'll see somewhere between a 4% and 6% increase in price. That may be closer to 4 or 5% than it's going to be 6. The industry's been projecting a 1 to 1.25% increase in interest rates, factoring in the December 0.25% interest rate that we had. I think there may be indicators out there both on the international front as well as the economy that we may not see the Fed be able to make 4 bumps this year. That's their intention, is to bump at least a 0.25% per quarter, and we may see that come in more along 0.5%. Days on market time, I think you'll see grow from where we are now to a more normal market around 70 days. So where are we in the market transitioning between buyers and sellers? We were in a seller's market. Then for the last probably year, we've been in a lot of areas in a good in-between market. And I think now we're starting to see a couple areas of the county shift to a buyer's market, a little bit more inventory, a little bit more negotiability for a buyer. And so I believe that throughout this year, we'll continue to see this year later and into 2017 that we're transitioned to a buyer's market. What about a recession? So we have to see the inventory build before there's a recession to that 8 months inventory. We're a long way from that right now, so it looks to me that we're probably about 2 years away from where we could reach that point. So just watch that number, and that'll be a good indication. And then for affordability, we would need to see it drop into the low 20s and down into the teens, as well as that inventory building to 7+ and on to 8 months. So we have a ways to go there, so I'm optimistic for 2016. cautiously optimistic for 2017, and then we'll see beyond there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Corey. That's pretty good news in the buyer standpoint, I'd say. Next up is Navrina Singh. She's Director of Product Management at Qualcomm. She's been a leader in the field of mobile technologies for more than 12 years and a key architect of Qualcomm's global innovation vision. She spearheads Qualcomm's impact to discover, develop, and commercialize technology breakthroughs. So new products, she's the one. Responsible for creating, managing, and operationalizing, that's such a word, the global corporate-wide innovation incubator focused on future technology, product roadmaps, and patent portfolio for Qualcomm. So, come on up.
Thank you so much. Okay. So thank you so much for having me. This is my first time here in San Diego's Economic Roundtable, so very excited. And I do understand that I'm the person between now and the Vice President of beer. So I'll hopefully make it as exciting and interesting as beer industry. There's a certain disclaimer I wanted to put before I start my presentation. Today you're going to be hearing a lot of numbers, a lot of projections. I'm not an economist, I'm an engineer. So I didn't want to pretend to be one today. So what I'm bringing to the table is a personal perspective on innovation economy. I'm also going to bring Qualcomm's perspective because we are doing a lot of corporate entrepreneurship, a lot of corporate innovation, which fuels the economic growth of regions like San Diego. And the third thing that I'm going to bring to the table is community perspective. So you're hearing a lot of projections, be it about skills gap, real estate market, job growth, et cetera. But there's a very vibrant community which is really focused on the future ideas. And basically, that community has a very different perspective. So my presentation, unlike others, is not going to have a lot of charts and graphs. It's going to be a lot of what we are seeing right now in terms of transitioning from what San Diego has been and how we are really progressing into the startup ecosystem. That's going to be the focus. I did want to start with Qualcomm because all the foundation of who I am today and also the innovation work that we've been doing is because of this company. And it actually started out as a startup 30 years ago. So Dr. Jacobs had a vision, and the vision was how can everyone, everywhere in the world, have a cell phone number? And that vision was so powerful, it's resulted in this Fortune 500 company, which basically is powering the cell phones that all of you have and sleep with, I'm sure. So I think if you think about Qualcomm as a startup 30 years ago and where we are today, one of the key questions that comes to mind is what has really enabled the economic development of this region given what Qualcomm has done? So this was a very interesting study put together by San Diego Workforce Foundation 2013, slightly different scenarios now, given where Qualcomm is right now as a company. But I thought this was really interesting to start this conversation. For every job that Qualcomm have, we've created about 2.3 jobs in San Diego region. And that's, just think about the scale, that's amazing. And for every economic activity that we've had, Qualcomm has added about $4 billion in direct and indirect economic activity in this region. And we've spoken a lot about different sectors which are in this region that basically is equivalent to 6 major industry sectors in this region. And I think what I look at when I think about innovation economy is not just capital accumulation. It really is appropriation, aggregation of knowledge, as well as technology development. So one of the metrics that I did put here is how do Qualcomm employees engage with the community? How do they contribute to the community, which actually is extremely important as you're building on new ideas. So 165,000 hours, this was only in 2011. So imagine like $4 million every year worth of time that these employees are putting or feeding into the San Diego region. And the reason this is really important to think about in the backdrop is today it is a Fortune 500 company, but 30 years ago it started with an idea. And as I talk about the innovation economy today, it's all going to come back to the key same thing, which is how do you basically create innovation? And a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about what innovation is, so I really just wanted to start out with, there's a very meaningful way to define innovation, and that is, at the end of the day, it has to create value. And more importantly, it's not just an idea, it's how do you implement, scale, grow that idea to create that value. And as demonstrated by Qualcomm in the past 30 years. And when you're building on these ideas, it's not just about the entrepreneur. So anyone here can come up with an idea. The question is, how do you now really build, as I mentioned, value out of it? So there's a whole ecosystem that goes behind building that idea. And the reason I'm sharing this right now is as I talk about where currently San Diego is, this is very important to think about the different ecosystem inputs that are really vibrant and taking a new life of its own in San Diego. And that's why as we start thinking about what's next for San Diego from economic development, there are multiple factors that are going to come into play, new kind of industries that are going to get formed, new kind of skill sets that's going to emerge, a very new wave of corporation who we should be attracting here, but is going to also get generated here, a new wave of thinking in research and development that's going to happen, because to actually create an idea, to have an idea and to build it to scale, you really need all these different parameters. So I'll be covering a few key inputs right now in our startup ecosystem, and also tying it back to the value of corporations, especially in San Diego. So to start out with, one of the key things to develop an idea is do you have the right community? Do you have the right cross-pollination of ideas? Do you have diversity of thought? And the way that we've encouraged that in US and in the world is by creating hubs. And these hubs essentially are the clusters, innovation clusters, where people with ideas, people with skills, people with capital come together and they make magic happen. So in San Diego, we've had about 27 such entrepreneurial clusters. And what they basically translate to is either incubators, and incubators are where ideas actually get access to experts, you get access to venture capitalists, you get access to corporations to build on technologies, et cetera. There are also accelerators, which are very, very focused programs, where if you are a first-time entrepreneur, you can understand how do you basically, if you have a technology idea, have the business backbone, have the understanding of government, have the understanding of private markets, and scale your idea. So the accelerators are more like educational platforms. And then co-working spaces. Those are very interesting because these are generally for people who are either first-time entrepreneurs or communities who've done or built companies in the past, but instead of working out of the garage or instead of working out of a leased space, can they now come together in this co-working environment because they're going to meet like-minded people who are thinking about the next big things for a region, for a country. What I've listed here is some of the key incubators, accelerators, co-working spaces that I've been involved with. EvoNexus, I'll talk a little bit more about it. Plug and Play San Diego, last year you had Gabby come and speak at this roundtable about Plug and Play. One of the ones that really is very exciting is Hera Hub. Felina Hansen started this about 5 years back, and her idea was, how can I encourage more diversity? That means more women entrepreneurs in this community, because if you look at the number of women participating in entrepreneurial activities, it's actually really, unfortunately, less than 10%. So how do you basically increase the chances of a woman succeeding as a founder or joining a startup? So Hera Hub is a very, very interesting space. Startup leadership program, Connect. Connect has been around for a long time. I think they are going to go through reinvention, just like as we were looking at what are the inputs that direct the economic trends. We have to start really thinking about, are those the right metrics to look at? And the same thing for Connect. They've done a great job with the innovation economy here. The question for them is going to be, are they going to be quick to evolve, to adapt to some of the changes that is happening in this region? So talking about the value of these clusters of innovation, I wanted to give you an example of EvoNexus, and the reason is because we've partnered with EvoNexus for the past 4 years in a program which is called Qualcomm at EvoNexus. So EvoNexus, for those of you who don't know, is a technology incubator based here in San Diego. They have 2 locations in downtown and in UTC. And the idea is, if there are interesting startups, can we admit them into the EvoNexus program, provide them mentorship, get them access to VCs, get them access to corporations like Qualcomm. And some interesting stats, just in the past few years of their existence, they've raised a total funding of over $700 million. They've created 1,200 jobs in San Diego region. They've had portfolio companies of over 100. They've also created a very interesting way for corporations to acquire these companies. We actually acquired one of them in 2013. And that is so significant because new ideas emerge from a couple of key places: universities, big corporations, or it emerges from these incubation clusters. So I think this is a very sort of forward-thinking way of figuring out how can San Diego evolve as a region. And one of the key roles that big corporations like Qualcomm play in this is basically through mentorship, through capital, et cetera. So we launched the Qualcomm at Evo Nexus partnership, which I ran in 2012, and we funded about 5 companies. This program is still ongoing. It's been handed off to our ventures organization. We acquired one of the key companies that has augmented our security portfolio. And these innovation clusters are so important because when we start looking at and comparing, and that's something that I've tried to avoid doing in this presentation, is comparing to Silicon Valley. If you look at Silicon Valley and you start thinking, why are there higher chances of success in Silicon Valley compared to San Diego? There are a lot of multiple factors, but one of the key things which people don't talk about is the paid-forward mentality that has really emerged in Silicon Valley. There are a lot of billionaires, millionaires, and they've created some amazing companies, and one of the ways that they want to give back to their region, to their community, is by mentoring this new breed of entrepreneurs. And incubators like these basically help and enable with that mission. So the second input that I wanted to talk to you about is the research and development that's happening in San Diego. I'm so excited about this because in my job in Qualcomm, we are envisioning a future that nobody right now knows is going to happen. We are thinking about technologies that you'll get to see 5 years from now, and we are seeing it right now. So where does all that research and development actively happen? It's not happening all in corporations like Qualcomm. So we partner extensively with UCSD, SDSU, USD, USC, UCLA, all these universities who are contributing a lot of new talent, new thinking, new ideas. Again, this study was very, very interesting, which was put together by EDC, Economic Development Council of San Diego. And just to show you the economic impact of the research and development happening in San Diego, $4.6 billion. I mean, that's huge. That's the impact on our region's GRP annually. And this infographic is so exciting because it just gives you a sense of 34 Comic-Cons. Oh my God, wow. That's the amount of money that we are putting into this research and development. And another very interesting thing is that going back to the comment that was made this morning about how do you get governments involved. So look at the number of federal and philanthropic research funding that's going into our research institutions, about $1.8 billion. And this is really important because this is where the future is being thought about. And then partnerships with companies like Qualcomm basically helps that future to actually be realized. We have a strong partnership with CalIT2, which is now called Qualcomm Institute of Technology. And if you look at the array of areas that we are focusing on there, it varies anything from robotics, collaborative robotics, all the way up to genome sequencing and thinking about how do you do the right kind of cancer treatments. I mean, that's huge. Like we want that with one blood sample. Can you figure out, what kind of diseases are there in your body? And going back to the role of corporations, just last week, Illumina announced a very interesting spin-out. It's called Grail, stemming from Holy Grail. And the idea there is, can you, with just a drop of blood, figure out the cancers in your body? Now, that corporation started out as a startup and has been able to build this expertise, has able to demonstrate success, and now has attracted capital from people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos for this startup. And that startup is going to be based here in San Diego. Again, think about the economic impact of that. It's not only pumping in money, it's pumping in talent and new kind of investors who traditionally would not have looked at San Diego in the same light as the investors in Silicon Valley look at entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. So it's fascinating, the amount of research and development and the thought that we are putting here in our San Diego region. I don't know if it's clear, but now, you can have the best idea, you can have all the talent, you can have all the partnerships, but at the end of the day, everything in this world takes money. So funding is a critical component of making sure that these ideas actually can be realized. This work was published by Connect, which does yearly reports on our innovation economy. And this is a feel-good slide, to be honest. And the reason I wanted to put it here is so that you all feel good that there is money coming into San Diego. However, I don't feel good about this slide. And the reason is, if you look at the amount of VC and venture capital invested, and this is only for 2014, it's about $800 million. But if you start now peeling the layers and seeing where this $800 million is going to, what sectors it is feeding the sector which is the strongest in San Diego, which is biosciences, life sciences, biotech and life sciences. So that is exciting, but if you think about it, if you just focus on, if you have 3 kids and you just focus on the kid who's the smartest and give all the attention to that kid, guess what is happening to your other 2 kids? So I know it's a bad analogy, but I'm a new mom, so that's a very powerful analogy for me. So even though this 800 million looks exciting, I just want you to think about it in a couple of perspectives. One, where is this money going? Which sectors it is going in? We certainly need to be fueling biotech, life sciences, cybersecurity, et cetera, but we need to start thinking about some of the other high-tech jobs. And obviously, I'm biased because engineering and high tech is something that I get very excited about. But as Marnie shared in the morning, if you look at the high-paying job and the low-paying job and the middle-class jobs, the high-paying jobs don't exist in San Diego. But the future really is dependent on some of these technology advancements that are going to happen in places like San Diego. So it's really important for us to start thinking about where is all this money going. And another layer, if I peel, and again, one of the reasons I didn't want to put those numbers here, but just in 1 year ending, I think it was 12-month period ending March of 2015, the amount of venture capital invested in Silicon Valley was $12.8 billion. And here it is 800 million. And 12.8 billion with 90% of that going to high tech. Here 800 million with 5% going to high tech. So there's a complete sense, like there's a very different thing happening in Silicon Valley versus Bay Area. But again, I don't want to focus on those differences. I think the idea here was we have an opportunity. It's a great opportunity to really fuel some new industries, new sectors in San Diego by leveraging corporations, by leveraging partnerships with universities, by leveraging government as well as the state government partnerships. So just another couple of things. I work very closely with San Diego Ventures Group. It's a nonprofit which is trying to do a lot to ensure the right kind of investors are actually getting access to San Diego. So a couple of things we've been discussing is what is the profile of these investors? Why are people not investing enough in San Diego startup economy? Why is Silicon Valley still the hotbed? Or if you look at some of the emerging areas, Oregon, Seattle, Boston are the other startup hubs. So what can we do in our capacity to attract the right kind of VCs? And that's a very important question because we have some very rich individuals in San Diego, and what we are finding is not all of them invest in San Diego. Either there are people who don't know how to invest, have never done investments, so how can we help them or train them in a manner that they can actually fuel money into San Diego economy by funding startups? The second thing is, if they have invested in the past, what we are finding more and more is that they, as an investor, want to reduce their risk of that investment, so what they end up doing is going to other hubs where there's a higher chance of success. So Bay Area just happens to be one of those hubs. So it's really important, again, we've done a great job in the past few years to keep our startup economy very vibrant and get the right kind of investors. We have some amazing entrepreneurs that I actually get to work with, and but I think there's a lot of work that we still need to do. One of the things I did want to highlight here is Hera Fund. It's an offshoot of Hera Hub, which was a co-working space for women. And Hera Fund has a very interesting focus now. How can you create angel investors who are women and fund startups who are run by women? And I think that's a very niche area, but it's so important because that actually is going to give more and more confidence in inducing or instilling the right kind of diversity into the startup ecosystem. And they've done an amazing job in the past year. I sit on the board, and there's good things coming. So given that we've looked at the San Diego research, we've looked at some of the incubators or these clusters, the key question again is, where is this innovation happening? What are the frontiers of innovation for San Diego? We are seeing a lot of more activity in software. We've recently had corporations like Fitbit and GoPro join the San Diego region. We're so excited about that. But the question is, how do we make sure that we are going to be the hub for high tech in the future as well? So I'm not much into predictions, because predictions for me are really vision setting. So I think my vision setting for 2016 is there's so much talent floating around in San Diego. Some of the emerging areas that we're going to see really taking off in startup community or in startup ecosystem are going to involve machine intelligence. They're going to involve cybersecurity, robotics, big data. And these are what's going to transform the future. Pretty much every industry. Talk about beer, talk about retail, talk about homeowners, et cetera. It's going to disrupt all those industries. So these are actually, San Diego is very well positioned because of the kind of talent that is floating around right now to really address some of these sectors. This is my inspirational moment of the day for you, but think about it. When you have an idea, and if you just keep sitting and thinking about that idea, it's like you're at the bottom of the mountain, and you want to climb the mountain, but you keep thinking about it. You never take a step. You're never going to get to the top. So for us, it's really important as a community to think about, there are so many ideas floating around, but what can we do? It doesn't have to be a corporation. It doesn't have to be a government agency. It doesn't have to be a university. What can you do in your own capacity to translate these ideas into meaning, into value? So I just wanted to share some parting thoughts around strategic investments on our innovation economy. There are a lot of different pillars that you can look at, but these, I think, for me, are really key pillars of investments. So as we are thinking about government funding, as we are thinking about private funding, where can we invest so that we get the maximum bang for the buck? One is in talent. And the idea there is, how can we make sure that there is no brain drain happening from San Diego? And there are different, there's a lot of work that our startup community is doing to make sure that happens. And I'll be sharing some thoughts on that in just a moment. The second is really creating diversity of thought and clusters. So there's downtown San Diego has been a keen focus for the past 2 to 3 years to develop that startup ecosystem. But we need to now use that model and start building other clusters of startups in North County, in Otay Mesa, in Solana Beach, et cetera. So I think it becomes really important that we don't think about San Diego as just one point. We think about it in terms of different clusters and ensuring that there's a lot of cross-pollination of ideas among those clusters. Investment in marketing, I think that's a really big thing, because you can come up with the best companies, you can have the best exits like Eco ATM, which was a really strong exit for San Diego. But how do you basically talk about it? How does the rest of the nation, how does the rest of the world know about San Diego? National Geographic did a very interesting documentary on smart cities in the world, and San Diego was selected as a smart city. And it was such an honor to have Illumina, Qualcomm, Think-A-Bit Labs, and all these other great things happening in San Diego be highlighted in that documentary. But one of the key pieces that we missed from the documentary was our startup ecosystem. So I think it's really important that as we are thinking about different channels for sharing what San Diego has been doing, amplifying that message is going to be really key. And at the end of the day, one of the new, when someone asks the question about, is buying a car or buying a house a good indicator of what's to come? There are new indicators, like a lot of countries are investing in public transportation, connected places. So I think a new indicator is, are you not buying a car because the public transportation is so freaking awesome that you don't have to buy a car? And then you're going to have shared economy, like even Uber, but it could be for jets, it could be for train or whatever. I really think that's going to be a very different kind of metric system that we'll have to leverage to figure out what is the optimal investment. And all these things, if done right, are going to really help with sustaining the competitive advantage that San Diego has. We are at a very interesting point. We've spoken a lot about the partnership and the closeness to Tijuana, which has manufacturing, but those are one or two key elements. The key question is, over time, how do we maintain that sustainability in competitive advantage? So I don't know how much time I have, but I always like to end with key actions. And again, I've not covered everything in the interest of time, but what can you do today? Amplify the message about the great ideas, the great universities, the great talent, the entrepreneurs who are in San Diego. That's really, really important. Support them as they are creating, they have this initiative, which is San Diego Startup Week. It's a week-long initiative in June where we try and excite people about the great new ideas, the great new companies that we are forming in San Diego. So supporting those initiatives becomes really important. Preventing brain drain. There are different mechanisms, but one is bringing more corporations to San Diego, increasing the opportunities for matching between existing startups, existing corporations, existing universities, and the talent that might be considering leaving San Diego. How do we actually create more of those collision points? Infrastructure. I have taken the public transportation here once because it's not because I like to drive a car, it's because it's not as easily available. So as we are thinking about policies that's going to affect our region, I think infrastructure has to be one of the key talking points to ensure that there is good connection among all the different drivers of the ecosystem of startups. And the last one is diversity of the entrepreneurial clusters, thinking about different regions that needs to have the incubators, the accelerators, but thinking about the kind of people who are coming into these clusters. Do we have enough representation of people from different backgrounds? Do we have enough representation of women? Do we have enough representation of the right leaders in San Diego who right now might not be focused on creating these new startups? So I think we are at a very interesting, for 2016, I am so excited because disruption is already happening in San Diego. The key question is going to be what all of us do as business leaders, as community members to ensure that that amplification of innovation economy does happen. And then it's all going to feed back into the economic development of this region. And then you'll see in all the charts that were presented this morning that there was a tipping point which actually helped really scale the jobs, the real estate, et cetera. And it all started with that idea. So thank you so much. I'm going to be here to answer any questions if you have.
Well, I'm all charged up after listening to that. It sounds like such opportunities for everybody in San Diego. So, Navrina, thank you so much. Final speaker, a little light. Foam on the top of our final presentation, and no one's mentioned the stadium yet, but we do drink beer at the stadium, so maybe there's some connection there that Mark might want to bring up. He's the Vice President of Beer at Karl Strauss, responsible for all sales, marketing, production, distribution, warehousing, quality control, and human resources. He has 28 years of experience in senior level sales and marketing, so that'll bring in what Navrina said about the importance of marketing to success, and has been involved with such companies as Gallo, Seagram's, Palomar Mountain Spring Water, so it's not all just alcohol, UPS Store, PIP and Sir Speedy's Printing, and of course, Karl Strauss. So Martin, wind it up for us.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. We've been talking about beer since about 9 o'clock this morning, and I'm happy to go last because I got a feeling you're going to walk out of here and want to order San Diego brewed craft beer, and that'll help the industry make its numbers for January. I want to put your minds at rest, first of all. I am a professional. I graduated from San Diego State University, and if there is one thing I excelled at in school, it was beer. So you are in good hands, my friends. Let's go ahead and get this going. So what is this craft beer phenomenon all about? Some of you may know, some of you may not know what's happening in the world out there, but simply put, consumers, all of us, we're just eating and drinking better. And what's happening is people are willing to pay a little bit more if you're going to give them quality. And that's really what the craft beer movement is all about at the end of the day. Consumers today are voting with their dollars, and they're more smart than they ever were in the past, especially the younger consumers. They love to pick up something and read it, and beer is something that they are incredibly passionate about. They want to know where you're from, what makes up your brewery, who you're all about, and once they know a little bit about you, they're going to go ahead and buy you, and hopefully they continue to buy you. I often get asked by people, hey, Mark, what's the demographics of the craft beer community? And, honestly, it's really not a demographic. It's more of a psychographic. Craft beer is a way of life for people now. And again, it's just because people are trying to live a little bit better and eat a little better. It's an affordable luxury for folks. And there's nothing, people want to spend a couple extra dollars on themselves. Craft beer fits that bill beautifully for them. One of the things that, what did I do here? Oh, I dropped one of my slides. Sorry. That's good. I can start from there. Okay. One of the things I wanted to share with you, and I'll find my slide in just a moment here, but it's the what the craft beer community looks like overall right now. So I'm going to talk to you at first from a national level. We'll break it down to California, and then we'll go down to a San Diego level. Really, back before Prohibition, there was well over 2,000 breweries that were in the United States. It looked a lot like it looks now. There was a lot of people making a lot of great beers, and life was good. And then along comes Prohibition, and of course things slowed down a little bit. After Prohibition, you saw the emergence of a lot of the domestic macro beers that we are used to today. About in the late 1980s or so was when the birth of the craft beer movement really started getting going. And here in San Diego, Carl Strauss Brewing Company was the original craft brewery. In fact, we were the first brewery to open in San Diego since Prohibition. We're kind of the guys that got the party started here, if you will, in San Diego. And about the mid-1990s, the industry took a little bit of a dip. And the reason for that was a lot of the people that got into the game were making beer that wasn't very good. And you and I as consumers are not going to maybe buy it once, but you're not going to buy it twice. Once we figured out the science and the art of beer, the industry started taking off again. And if you look at the industry today, there's well over 4,000 breweries here in the United States. And people often ask me, well, where is the end of that rope? And the latest statistic is there are 1.5 breweries that open up in the United States every single day. And so it's quite a crazy pace at the moment. I don't know where the end is, to be perfectly honest with you. We look around the community, and there doesn't seem to be any shortage of people. And if I can just draw on a comparison from the boutique wine industry, there are well over 8,500 wineries in the United States, and they don't seem to be having a problem. So I think we've got a lot of runway when we look forward, when we look at this. Some of the things that are happening, though, in the marketplace from a bigger picture standpoint, the faux crafts, as us true craft guys like to refer to them. So you have a lot of the macro guys out there, the Bud Miller and Coors, if you will. We steal their market share in each and every day, and that's exactly who is trying to they're trying to combat that because their domestic beer is not growing at the clips that it should be growing. So you take a brand like Blue Moon, for example. It's an outstanding brand. The liquid is amazing. It's priced appropriately. But what most people don't know is that's a Miller Coors product, and it's always been a Miller's Coors product. If you look at the bottle caps that I have up there, brands such as Kona, Third Shift, Goose Island, Shock Top, those are all Anheuser-Busch brands. And so those are all owned by the big boys. What's going on in the world out there? Well, the big guys are a little bit upset with us. They're having a hard time trying to make a go of it and get into this craft beer world. And so what do? You start seeing a lot of mergers and acquisitions next, right? I expect that we're going to see that activity continue probably for the next 12 or 18 months. But you've got people like Anheuser-Busch InBev out there who have been just snapping up breweries left, right, and center. Most recently, they purchased Golden Road up the freeway in Los Angeles. And just as in a couple of weeks ago, they purchased Four Peaks Brewing out there in Arizona. Duvel, however you want to pronounce it, multiple ways. They made a significant investment in Firestone Walker here a few months back. Outstanding brand, Firestone Walker. And I look for that relationship to continue. Miller Coors is in the game in a big way. Many of you may know St. Archer, a brand that started here a few years ago in San Diego as a startup. They sold for $35 million to Miller Coors. So great job for those guys. But then you also see Miller Coors doing things like 10th and Blake Beer Company. And that's where Blue Moon and some of these other brands that they produce exist. And what they want is they don't want you and I to realize that it's actually a big beer company behind a little beer company. And so I challenge you sometime, try to go to 10th and Blake and see their brewery. There is no brewery. It exists on the internet. Craft brewers are selling portions of their ownership. Sam over there on the East Coast, who owns Dogfish Head, just recently took on a little private equity. Heineken and Lagunitas have married up together. I keep hearing people call them Hagunitas now, so we'll see if that sticks. And then, of course, our friends at Ballast Point. And these are an outstanding group of people. We know the guys at Ballast Point. They're personal friends of ours, and we couldn't be more thrilled for them. They just sold their brand for $1 billion to this little company called Constellation. Constellation is no joke, folks. They're the people that own Corona, Modelo, a ton of liquor and wine. They are a huge organization. And so we'll see some interesting things come out of that. And so at this point, people always ask me, well, is Karl Strauss Brewing Company for sale? And the answer is no. Our strategy has never been that we are for sale. We're in this for the long haul. However, if you have $1,001,001, I got a feeling I could probably get an audience for you. There's the slide. I found it that I was trying to share with you of how the industry had changed over the years. We'll continue going on past that one. There are over 600 craft breweries now in the state of California. It is absolutely crazy. This looks like a map for Starbucks as opposed to a map for craft breweries. So as you're traveling the state, you have no worries. You can certainly find a good watering hole as you're going along. This is a great slide for us brewers. It's a feel-good slide, as I said, somebody said recently. And that basically just says that the industry is on fire. And it's really more of a regional game for most of us. That's how pretty much most of us sell our beers. But you can see from 2000 all the way through, and I apologize, some of my slides are a little bit out of date. Us craft brewers aren't always on the speed of things when the year changes. But the beautiful thing is you see even right through the tough economy, we continue to clip right along. And beer is one of those things that people will drink in good times and they will drink in bad times. In fact, we even get a little bit of a trade down from the folks that would normally be drinking high-end liquor and wine. When they trade down, they trade into craft beer. So it's a good place to be, regardless what the economy's doing. Same kind of slide there. This slide is just basically saying that the majority of guys here in California are very small producers. People like ourselves, Stone, Ballast, Coronado, all the guys in town, the bigger guys in town, we're going to be over more to the right of this graph. We're producing, 100,000 plus barrels of beer a year. Those two big charts you see, the two big bars you see in the middle, that's what's happening to the beer community all around the United States, and things are going hyper-local. And so what you're starting to see are really cool little brands, people like Society and Second Chance Brewing Company and Hess. Mike Hess makes some amazing beers, all coming online now. And so it's becoming a very long tail, but there's a lot of new innovation coming from these guys, and it's exciting for all of us. This slide is simply telling us that pretty much all the beer that us California brewers make, the majority of us sell it here in California as well. Let's see, this is a fun slide. It shows beer shipments in the state of California. And back in 2014 and even 2015, we're at about 8.6, probably 9.6% now of total California beer shipments. Back in 2009, we didn't even make the chart. So that's how fast that this thing is continuing to clip along. I wanted to share with you just an example of how strategies can be different here as we start getting more into a local level. And take, for example, our friends over at Ballast Point. They're probably going to net out the year somewhere around 150,000 barrels or so brewed. I'm not sure what their number will be, but a huge number, right? An outstanding number. What my point here is that it'll take them 30 states to sell all of that volume. And that's been their strategy, is to go out and continue to open new states and continually bring growth back to the home. Stone's done that, Coronado, Green Flash, a lot of the guys in town are, bigger, have done that. And that's great, and it's a beautiful strategy for them. It's a little in contrast, though, to what Karl Strauss Brewing Company does, and I don't think many people realize that we are, out of 4,000 breweries, we're the 45th largest craft brewery in the United States, and we're available in one state. We've never left the state of California, and that's by design, okay? What we are is we're committed to quality at the end of the day, and we know, Carl beat it into our brains, that you will make outstanding liquid, because if you don't make outstanding liquid, the rest of it's a waste of time. And that's really what we're all about. And so, for a company that started this business back in 1989, we are the older guard in town, certainly, but we made 103 different beer styles last year, and in the last 4 years, we've won 85 plus medals for quality. This company's got game. So I encourage you, next time you're in the grocery store or in the bar, try a Karl Strauss if it's been a while. You won't be disappointed. Let's drill this down now to what the economic impact means to San Diego and the community here for craft brewing. The economic value has more than doubled in the last 3 years. It's gone from $300 million to just over $600 million in 2015. And to give you an example of what that feels like, the Super Bowl last year in Arizona meant about $500 million to the entire state of Arizona.
China. And so we're already eclipsing that one for them. And so if the chargers want to move on, we might pick up the slack for them. So don't worry about it. There are 115 breweries here in San Diego County, and I'm certain 2 more opened up since I started this presentation. That's a 211% increase since 2011, and really that's being driven by mostly the new enterprises. The small guys are opening up, but also a lot of us older guys who are bigger, because we really, when we go to expand, we need to hire people. It takes a village. And we're quickly approaching $1 billion in total annual industry sales for craft in San Diego, which is exciting to see. That's a $160 million increase since 2011. This is an example of what it looks like now in San Diego, and so you can pretty much hit any area in the county and find outstanding craft beer. There are some people just making some really neat beers, and it's fun for all of us in the game. This slide just basically shows the growth of that and how it's ratcheted up quickly over the last few years. In fact, 80% of that 115 breweries, give or take, have come online in the last 3 years or so. So while some people are starting to think it's a get-rich-quick scheme, those of us that have been doing this for a long time know that it's anything but. You need to put your big boy pants on if you want to become a craft brewer. It's a very capital-intensive and labor-intensive business to be in. And again, if you're not making great liquid, don't even bother getting in the game. The economic, job growth, what does that mean to San Diego? Well, job growth has soared. San Diego breweries directly created 3,752 jobs back in 2014, and that's versus 6,203 jobs at the end of 2015. That's a 122% increase since 2011. Carl Strauss Brewing Company employs about 750 employees. Another thing that people always find fascinating when they realize that we're still only in one state. And really, most of this growth in job growth is driven by a lot of us big guys in town, because as we look to continue to expand our footprints and our businesses, we're adding a lot of people at any point in time. And that's kind of what the job growth chart looks like for everybody, so that's exciting to see as well. This slide I grabbed here is one of the last slides that I have for you today, and basically it's just illustrating that people are drinking more and more local. And for a time, even people in San Diego County would purchase brands that maybe weren't made inside San Diego County, but that pendulum's now swinging, and we're seeing the consumers purchase local. And that's happening in each and every community across the United States, because lots of people are making great craft beers now for us, which is wonderful as consumers. It's challenging from an operational standpoint, because we have to come out with new all the time. And so it can be a little bit of a game for us there. That's pretty much all I had for you folks today. I want you to stay thirsty, okay? Thank you very much for all you do for us.
Well, I wet my whistle for more information and more beer. And this has been so interesting. All the pointed comments today and predictions are fascinating. We have a number of questions from the audience. If you have some more, just bring them up here and we'll try and get to as many as possible in the next half hour or so. But to start things off, I thought it'd be interesting to ask all of you, instead of looking backward to where things have been in the last few years, what is the next big thing in San Diego? We've had beer, we've had drones, we've had software, the Evo Nexus productions. So each one of you, just go down the list and say, in your own area or your expertise, what do you think is the next big thing that young people and entrepreneurs, investors should be looking for San Diego to capitalize on? So starting with Marnie.
Well, first, whatever I say is going to be wrong. Doesn't matter. That's been proven. But I'd say one of the things that has been mentioned a lot today is clusters. And clusters have a tendency to reinvent themselves as they move along. So I think you have to look sort of internally here and then maybe combine that together with the trends in the marketplace to try to determine how we may adapt ourselves to new demands that are out there today. So I'd say on the one hand, we are a cluster noted for the biotechnology area. So, and you're beginning to see where weaponization, other kinds of things, GMO, modified grains, things like that. So biotechnology is responding to demands in the marketplace, and the biotechnology industry is no different, sort of a strain off of that whole process. The other thing, we've always had a long aeronautical engineering kind of background, starting with defense, and it's true today, and as it metastasize itself, for example, in drones and other kinds of stuff. But it looks like, you know, there are private corporations entering into space today. So that's the other area that I think San Diego probably could play a role in, is that space exploration end of it with the investments. Last point I would make, California in general, because of the rules and regulations in it, are forcing companies to do things that are different than outside California, especially related to greenhouse gas emissions and things like that. So again, it's forcing entrepreneurs to think ways to produce products that consumers can buy that are consistent with the rules and regulations here. So I would expect California to be in the lead, changing in the automobile industry. I think you see some of the high-tech industries now sort of thinking about investing in major ways. So that's the other area that I think San Diego can play a role in, but it will be the entire state itself.
I think for this one going to put on my educator hat and think about the skill set that I see students graduating from USD with that seem to be particularly attractive to employers. And I'm going to do it by shamelessly stealing a quote from Hal Varian. Hal Varian is a rock star in economic circles, but these days he is the chief economist at Google, which is one of the more awesome job descriptions I can imagine. But he was asked what his job advice was for students coming out, and he said, well, a good skill to have is one where you are kind of the hard-to-find complement to something that is ubiquitous. And he said, in this day and age, that's data, right? So all of the business models that we see emerging with more internet commerce, just we're all awash in data, and a very sought after, very difficult, very highly compensated skill is being able to turn a messy pile of data into some sort of actionable intelligence. And I think that's something that I'm proud of that we do relatively well here at USD. And I see a lot of our students getting jobs on the basis of their ability to do that, both here in San Diego, as well as a little bit of brain drain up to the Bay Area too. Evidently, they're not carrying their water up there and they have to come down and get our students to do it. But I do think this idea of being awash in data and needing to be able to organize it and turn it into strategic, actionable intelligence.
So as I mentioned earlier, we are looking into investing in more of apprenticeship programs in the region. And I talked a little bit about Miramar College's Life Sciences Apprenticeship Program, but a partner that we're working with is Disabled Advocacy. They received a $3 million grant from the Department of Labor to do apprenticeship programs in ICT, Information Communication Technologies, in project management, and in advanced manufacturing. So we're seeing an increase of those apprenticeship programs. The next big thing for us is basically what we call stackable credentials. As the economy changes and technology changes so quickly, some of the skill sets that you learned, especially in software, get as old as soon as they're developed. And so now educators are thinking of something called stackable credentials, where you learn one certification, and once that's out of date, you learn another one and you stack it above each other. So that helps our workers become a little bit more flexible to a changing economy and changing technology. So we're looking at how we can incorporate that in our workforce development programs.
I think in real estate, we're going to see that the next big thing is smart housing and green housing. And that's going to lead to a lot of energy conservation. I think that we're going to see battery life go from where it is today to 10 or 15 times its strength in the next probably 5 to 10 years. And that will change how we power our homes, how we power our automobiles, and how we power our lives. The next big thing is I think you'll see a shift between single-family homes being built where the majority will be vertical versus horizontal, and I think that's already in the city planning for the next 20 years, so that'll be something that you see. And then on the commercial side of real estate, there's a team of experts that have gotten together. In fact, there's probably several teams now that are building zero energy commercial buildings. They've already built several in the world, and so I think that will become a trend as well.
So I think the key thing that we're going to see in 2016 is emergence of very many more interesting technology startups in San Diego. And I think it's going to help us increase the number of people who are investing in these startups as well. In terms of technology trends, San Diego is so well positioned to be the leader in building intelligent machines. And what that really translates to is not just hardware in terms of building robotic applications or security applications, but it also translates to the data component that was just mentioned. Any service industry you think about, be it finance, security, retail, lifestyle, at the end of the day, it's not going to be people making decisions based on that data. It's going to be machines smart enough to figure out what the right insights from that data is going to be. We are already seeing one of the employees from Qualcomm actually started a company called Nirvana Systems, which is a startup here in San Diego, and it is really focused on how can you build deep learning networks, which is essentially absolutely essential when you have this piles and piles of data. How do you now compute and look through that data very quickly and efficiently? So we're going to see a lot of, I think, interesting companies coming in different sectors, which is based on data and disrupting service organizations. So I think that trend is coming very, very quickly. And I think
When we're going to buy a home, not their desire to own a home, because most of them do desire to own a home. The interesting thing is that a lot of times it's just a matter of finding out how to own a home. If you look at historical interest rates over the last 4 decades plus, they average around 8%. So we're sitting at still historically low interest rates, and that's great for millennials, and it's great for first-time homebuyers. And one of the things for millennials to think about, and we just need to get the education out there, if they rent a home today at the average rent in San Diego County, they're going to pay about $1,400,000 over their life, or at least over the next 30 years. It might not even be their life. If they buy a home today at today's low interest rates, their payment on average will be lower over the next 30 years on a fixed rate mortgage. They'll end up with about $1,506,000 in equity based on historical, well, way below historical appreciation, and they'll have a great nest egg. So I think that message has to get out there to them in a bigger way than we're doing it in the industry, and they're going to become homeowners. It's only a matter of when.
I have another millennial question, and this could go to anybody, really, but I love this question because I hear it a lot. Baby boomers turn 70 this year. Will they remain in the workforce or retire and allow for younger generations to advance into those higher level positions? How many of us have not heard this question? It's a great question, though. Who wants to tackle it? I think it's an economic question. It's a workplace question.
You know, we saw this last time when the stock market fell. Everybody who was planning on retiring back in the 90s said, I got to work about 5 more years because my 401k no longer is where I was before. I think we're going to probably see some of that. But one of the statistics Ryan brought up earlier, I think is an important one, where you see rates of growth. You take a look at some of the younger profile, the rates of growth in entering the labor force participation rate is actually pretty low, right? And you look at the older age group, 65 plus, they're actually relatively fast. There's some realization going on, I think. So no, I don't think we'll see the retirement that we had in the past. Back to your point about measurement, I don't think you can use past measures of retirement and then use that as a gauge of what will go on in the future. I think it's entirely different, both from a lifestyle point of view and an affordability point of view.
And Tina, maybe you can step in a bit because you probably focus on the first-time job seekers, but you had a huge number of people who were laid off in the last 10 years.
Yes.
And so many are so frustrated that they can't get in a decent job, much less what they were paid back then. So in your programs, what are you seeing about the 50-plus former wage earners, and are they starting to make inroads in this low unemployment situation, or what do they face?
Well, when we talk to employers, they are panicking actually, because we ask them, do you expect your workforce to be retiring in the next 5 to 10 years? And when you look at the age of the current workforce, they say yes. But when we talk to the workers, a lot of times these mature workers don't really want to retire. Life expectancy is a lot longer, and they want to work. I mean, it gives us all purposes if we have a good job that we really enjoy. So in our programs, we're trying to encourage employers to take advantage of their current workforce that's been there in a while and help them train the upcoming workers that are coming in. Because even though they're afraid their workers are retiring, when they do retire, all of that knowledge will escape with them once they leave the workforce. And it's a great opportunity to overlap those two generations, because as millennials, we love to learn from history. We love to learn from those that have a lot of knowledge. And I'm sure that all of those who are our seniors and our peers would love to educate us. So I really encourage employers to take advantage of both populations and both generations, because there's an opportunity right there that you can share expertise with the new innovation and with old traditional skills.
So I guess the new term is trust anybody over 50, I guess.
Can I just add a different perspective? I think corporations, and especially in high tech, we are seeing a very different mindset. It's really not about the seniority of the person as who should be selected as a leader. It's basically who has the expertise and the agility to keep pace. So what we are noticing in corporations is, irrespective of your numbers of years of experience, is really what new things are you bringing to this corporation so that it can stay competitive given all the changes that's happening in technology. So it's actually a reverse mentoring thing that at least I notice in Qualcomm and some of the companies I've been talking to, where the people who've been in workforce for a long time, they're not really thinking about retiring. They're really thinking about how can I develop these new skills so that I can keep abreast, and that learning opportunity is exciting for them to stay in workforce. And from Millennium point of view, they already are coming so much more capable and so much more sort of expert in some of these new areas, so their development path is not hindered by who's already existing in the workforce. So the question is kind of, I think, not framed in the right context, because now it's really about the expertise and the skills and not so much about the experience and seniority in corporations.
Let's see, another good question from our audience. Let's see, one question is, what is the role of higher education providers in getting people ready to work in jobs? You know, as somebody on the panel mentioned, if you get your degree, you expect a $120,000 job offer on the day of graduation. And I had that personal experience with my son who graduated, and he didn't think about starting to look for a job until he was done with his degree. And I said, you know, the last semester or quarter of your senior year, your 5th course ought to be job hunting. And I think you could, some of you who deal with the job seekers can say, what more can you tell full-time job seekers to do to get ready for work? Well, maybe Mark can talk about that from the beer standpoint, because I can imagine college students, you know, they like beer, and wouldn't it be fun to be a beer maker? And I think, well, you know, you can't just go from drinking beer to making beer. So what would you say about, take that as an example of people who you hire at Carl Strauss, and give us a sense of what they have to do for you to hire them.
You know, I'd have some pretty interesting interviews with some of the younger folks. Our company is all young people, and the first thing I have to tell many of them is, don't tell me in the very first 2 minutes how much money you want to make, because I'm not interested in hearing that. Okay? So we're going to first talk about the job and the responsibilities, and we're going to see if you meet those responsibilities. And maybe the second or third time we'll start talking about some money. It doesn't stop them from trying, though. So, no, I would, to get into the craft beer business in the state of California, the average earning wage right now is about $48,000, $50,000, depending on what you're going to do in the craft beer community. So it's not, you climb up a little bit further. There's some higher paying jobs, but there's also a lot of very entry level jobs. But it is a great first job for somebody to get out of college because it is a booming industry. What they want to do, though, is they want to look for a company that's going to provide them solid training. One of the reasons I started a Gala Wine Company was because of their training program, just so I could get that base underneath my feet before I started my career. Likewise, here at Karl Strauss Brewing Company, I have a solid onboarding program for all of our employees, depending on whatever department they're going to work in. To us, that's a way to give back to the employee right off the bat. We're not paying top dollar like some of the other guys in town. The good thing about craft brewing is it's a fun place for people to work, and so it lends itself to those younger folks.
I kind of like to hear what Novrina says that Qualcomm looks for for college students. What are you guys looking for?
I think, it's interesting. I get to work with a lot of young individuals. I'm a big supporter of STEM education, so I get to see a lot of people, even at high school level, who are thinking like 40-year-old about their future and about their meaning to their life and how they can impact the world and how they can create technologies that have these long-lasting impact. So the young people, the conversation has shifted. It's really about training and it's really about expertise building, but it is also about meaningful work and culture. So one of the things that, even though, and the reason I say this, engineers are not really known for, the culture part of, the soft skills, if you will. But I'm a big believer in that, because if at the end of the day, my contributions are not valued at the level that I'm dedicating to creating something new, it just loses meaning. So I think for this younger workforce, the key question would be get as much practical experience. It doesn't have to be paid experience. It can be internship, it can be just shadowing people, but it's really important to understand how the workforce is changing. It's really not about having a degree coming and sitting at a desk. It's really it's very agile, it's very dynamic. You have to think about new problems, you have to think about new solutions, you have to figure out how can you very quickly build expertise in an area that you've never even thought you could do. And all those things you can't learn if you're not in the battlefield, if you will. So I would say that getting more practical experience at an early age is really beneficial for these young individuals joining workforce.
If I could add something, so our whole system is now pushing out what we call career assessments or just strengths assessments. So the K-12 education is starting to implement that in their curriculum too, because a lot of times the youth would go into college, get all this debt and not know what they really want to do. And then we see in the extended learning, a lot of the learners coming back to get education are typically professionals that figured out what they wanted to do later in life. So we encourage assessments at an early age, learn what your strengths are, learn what you're interested in, and then start approaching towards the education that you want towards those strengths. Right now, our work is with actually Qualcomm and the Think A Bit Lab into the unified school districts to incorporate those types of assessments. So learn what your strengths are before you start trying to work towards that 4-year degree or whatever path you might take, and then get some work experiences in our internship program.
Well, that leads to a good question that Marnie mentioned during the break, and that is the minimum wage. What's the pros and cons of the minimum wage going up? I mean, everybody wants to make more money per hour, but there are some downsides to raising the minimum wage too high. And one of the issues that I heard on the NPR the other day was the idea of robots taking over food preparers, for example. And you might have a chef designing the menu, but then you turn over to some robot to chop the garlic, for example. So our economists might comment on the issue of minimum wage, whether it should go up. Obviously, it would benefit people earning it, but what are the risks to the overall employment opportunities?
You go first.
You're losing a chance, man. Can I go back one point? And I think there's a bigger role in preparation of for the workforce that's missing out of this discussion. And although it's important to train people so they have skills and education, if we continue to invest in relatively low-paying infrastructure, that's what we're going to get back. So a good example of this is what happened in the Golden Triangle, right? We put it next to UCSD, and it's a primary source of high-paying jobs in the region today, of which Qualcomm is one, but there are many other biotech and communications and software and other firms out there. But to the point, even though you may be able to create a workforce, if you don't have a place, right, where you can have these people take advantage of similar kinds of opportunities that occurred out there, the synergisms of having entrepreneurs next to each other, workforces next to each other of substantial sizes so that they can trade jobs and things like that, it's not going to happen. And we'll continue to ask questions about, well, do we need a convention center or a stadium? Right, and I'm saying, okay, do we want more retail outlets? Do we want, it's a service industry, it's important, it's a very stable component of the economy today. It's a big component of the economy, it's not going anywhere. There are large marketing behind it. But the question is at what point do you stop investing in that piece which you have a competitive advantage, Pacific Ocean and good weather, and we could build a lot of things around here and be good at that, and change horses here a little bit and talk about, okay, if we want to accomplish what Workforce Partnership is trying to do in moving people out of low-paying jobs and into higher-paying jobs with different kinds of skills, take advantage of the entrepreneurial activity that Qualcomm sounds like it's willing to do with venture capital, they have to have a place where all this is going to occur. They have to have some synergism. So I think public sector needs to stop talking about infrastructure that wouldn't support that kind of effort, but instead be directed at there. Now on to the minimum wage. What I'm concerned about a little bit is maybe some points that the panelists made here. One, the highest levels of unemployment today are our younger population, 15+%, under 20, 25 years old, somewhere in there. And then also people with high school or less education, also extremely high levels of unemployment. They are the group who would be impacted most by these minimum wage increases. And I think what has said about what productivity will do as a price of a product rises, the businessman has to ask himself, what's the lowest cost way I can provide the service and still stay in business? And the very people you're trying to help the most will be hurt the worst by some of the proposals on the table today. The $7.50 national minimum wage affects about 4% of the people who are employed. If you go to $15 an hour, it's 42% of the labor force. And then an entirely different level of adjustment needs to take place in a very short period of time in order for that to exist. It would be worse if you don't do it nationally and instead choose cities, right, in order to implement this. Because then what you create are boundaries where firms go to this boundary as opposed to that boundary and open up those outlets. That creates havoc in your transportation system. That's just going to create lots of other ripple problems that aren't being considered. Don't get me wrong, the ideology behind minimum wage is a good one. You want to help people who aren't earning very much money. But I think there are better economic ways of going about it, such as the earned income tax credit, in order to accomplish these goals without all of the ripple impacts. Okay, your turn.
I just echo the point. I think that the if the avowed goal is that we want to help these workers who are earning near the bottom of the earnings distribution out a little bit more, that the earned income, the tax system in general, and EITC, earned income tax credit in particular, are a less distortionary way to accomplish that goal. I think Barney said most of what I would want to say about minimum wage. I think the one thing, more on the kind of ripple effects of it that I would want to add on this idea of automation. I think one of the things that we've seen is in terms of what's happened in manufacturing, say in the last 25 years, that the jobs that are gone and not coming back are ones that are sort of routine labor, things that are automatable. So there's a combination of, with interest rates as low as they are, there's an incentive to find capital-based, i.e. machine-based ways to do this. And frankly, we're in an international economy where the kind of wage competition across countries there is for that kind of work means that we're almost always going to be on the losing end of there's some other country where it is cheaper to do that kind of very routine kind of work. So what's left for us is the more high-end, slightly more knowledge-based. So I think you look at some of the manufacturing in Southern California that's still here, it's much more of this kind of the intersection of the engineering prototyping stage and the production stage, the kinds of manufacturing where, like a satellite in LA County, for instance, that's something you basically build from scratch almost every time. It doesn't pop off an assembly line, much more. So you need kind of the higher end, higher paid engineering kind of talent. So I think just in terms of what impact does automation play in the kinds of jobs that we're talking about, a lot of the kind of more production-oriented jobs at the lower end of the earning spectrum, I think are ones that are both from the international competition pressure and the automation pressure are ones that are just very vulnerable, and we need to keep that in mind.
Okay, so I have one last question from the audience, and it probably wouldn't be a panel without this type of question that we often hear. But this individual writes that Boston just announced they attracted GE to move their headquarters from Fairfield, Connecticut, which is described as an unfriendly business environment. And so the question I'm going to ask you is about San Diego, California in general, and it's tough to do business here. And this question can apply to anybody, because you all have experience. But why are we still considered so unattractive? What do we need to do? What progress have we made? Probably none since I've been here in the last several years. But who wants to address that? Because I think that is a good question that we should bring up each time, the competitiveness.
Well, can I take the narrow sort of statistical view of it, which is that it is very difficult to find statistical evidence of the kind of businesses that are fleeing California because of the onerous tax pressure or business regulation or this. I hear a lot of individual, business owners that I talk about saying, I'm moving to Nevada, I'm doing this sort of thing. But any attempt that I've seen to kind of look at actual business formation data that comes out of the census and the various ways that we count this, it's just you never are able to show that California or any of the individual counties within California are suffering in this regard. It's a narrative you think is there, but I have yet to see anybody show it to me in the data in a way that I'm convinced by. So I think it is an issue and we do need to think about it, but it's like, I think we almost take for granted that it's true, and when you actually go to the data to try and verify it, it's much more difficult to find.
Well, Corey, maybe in the housing might be a good example, because you said, and Marnie, a couple of you pointed out how hard it is to build new homes in San Diego. I know that has to do with the fact that we had this leftover surplus from the boom days of the early 2000s, whether indeed it's this NIMBYism problem and the developer problem. So Corey, what do you make of this business environment for the real estate industry?
Well, I think from a builder's point of view, it isn't any leftover inventory because there simply isn't any, and there hasn't been for the last few years. It is more about the cost of processing permits, the cost of the regulation before they ever put any material or labor into building a home. It's unbelievably expensive. So that's also what keeps our cost of housing high. Now, with all that, I look at California, and I've lived here all my life, and it's a great place to live. You know, we do pay a sunshine tax to be in California, and sometimes people leave, but they seem to come back because they don't end up being as happy as they thought they were going to be living somewhere else. And I think with that said, you know, one of the challenges is to try and balance out between business and the environment and regulation. We have to start, we can't do that well from too far to either side. If we can find a way to balance that more in the middle with the state and what we do, I think we'll be a lot better off.
Oh, Marnie?
Yeah, maybe one couple of points here. One, although I agree with Ryan, you can take a look at the statistics and it shows firms' likelihood or probability of, say, moving from a city to a city or leaving a state or even leaving a country. And they're fairly low when firms actually do decide to leave. So I agree with that completely. I don't think that's the point. The point is how many new jobs of firms that are already here decide to stay in San Diego and create those jobs. And then the firm asks itself, right, okay, there's a certain product I'm producing, there's a certain price level that I'm going to have to meet, and what areas do I have the opportunity to start that in and be the most successful? And this is where California fails a lot. And that's why Tesla and some other very large, very important, attractive new industries have decided to search out places where it's relatively inexpensive to do their business. And Qualcomm's another good example. We all had great expectations of a vertically integrated Qualcomm here in San Diego where all the jobs, not just 15,000 of them, but all the jobs would be able to be located in San Diego. And we'd have multiple generations of people, just like the auto industry had multiple generations of people working in those factories to produce those new high technology jobs. The same thing's for our biotech industry. Right? We had great expectations for pharmaceutical plants being located in San Diego to take advantage of all of this research and development activity. But none of those have come to fruition. So Ryan's absolutely right. The actual decision for a firm that's here today to move is remote. But the ability to expand and operate, then the book is open about where you go. And California doesn't stack up well. And if you take a look at some of the new rules and regulations that the state is working under, if you're an energy consumer, the most expensive energy is produced in California, despite the fall in the price of energy out there. I'm not arguing that, you know, the concept behind what California's doing, the rules and regulations about greenhouse gas emissions are bad. That's not my point. But you have to recognize what ripple impact it has on your economy's ability to retain those same businesses, that you're creating the education institutions that are producing the talent that are actually going to go to work there.
I do wanted to say, though, even though we do have the most expensive energy, our energy bills are not as big, you know, as consumers as they are back east. I just have to put that out there because I've been working with the utilities, but yeah. Anyway, on that positive note, first I want to thank all of the panelists who've come. It's just been, you've done an excellent job. It was a lot of fun, and also for you folks who have stuck with us to the end here to listen to not only all the presentations, but all of the questions.